And we are live again. It is today's N10-008 Network Plus study group. We are just prepping here. We got about 8.5 minutes before we get started. The top of the hour. For those of you in another country, you've already mentioned Let's Play said, hey, why are we doing this an hour early? Well, here in the U.S., we need multiple times in the United States to be able to function. And so everybody sprang forward an hour on Sunday. And so here we are where we've changed all of our clocks and you have not. And so you're right. The theory of relativity in practical motion here, to you, it is at a different time. We are an hour earlier. What in the world? And I feel like I'm an hour earlier. It's going to take a while to make the jump here in the U.S. Why do we do this to ourselves? But here we are trying to get a live stream going. Let's check on a few things. We've got recordings going here, recordings going online, which is apparently getting a signal. We have a lot going on here. Stream is healthy. That's good. Hello, everyone. Hey, chat room. Hi. Thanks for being here. There was DGS in the chat room. Hey, can I just click on things and make that work? Let's see if I can get this working. DGS says that's the wrong lower third. Push the right button. There we go. DGS says, how you doing? I'm taking my exam sometime next week. Well, this will be a perfect lead-in to give you some ideas of things you might get on a Network Plus exam. Plus, we have tips and tricks and that type of thing. Stick around for the after show if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll do something like that. G says, I bought the exam voucher, possibly booking it into the month. So a lot of people working on their exam, working towards getting there. Some other folks checking in. There's Colorado. Welcome. Security Plus this Friday, says RH. Luck of the Irish might help. Maybe so. Is it, is this the Irish thing we're doing? Is it St. Patrick's Day coming up? I can't keep track. I cannot figure it out. I will eventually look at a calendar, which apparently is what I'm supposed to use to be able to determine these things. But that requires a little bit of research on my part. I need to work on that. Thanks for being here, though. There's some folks joining us from downtown Houston again. Thank you for attending, Jeff. Good to see you again. We've got Botswana. We've got, I think there was Columbia, Maryland. My Maryland is here. Let's Play says, do I like soccer? Well, I mean, I don't dislike soccer. I'm sort of agnostic, I guess, to soccer. Not a huge sports fan. I do like sports. I play sports. I do shoot. I play basketball in school. So, I mean, I like doing it. I like the team aspect of it. It's also a good way to get some exercise, but I just don't have time to follow a team. So that's the problem, is you need to get emotionally invested in a team. You need to bleed those colors of that team. You need to know the songs. You need to follow them. You need to understand the trait. You need to have at least some perspective. I have none. I have no perspective. I just don't have time to watch because I'm so busy making content that I don't really watch the football of any kind, as bad as that is. So eventually, someday, when I'm old, I can retire and I can watch the football. But for now, that's what we do. Yeah, those turnovers, you got to get back on defense. We need to work harder on our defense next time. That's where I would go with that. We've had this conversation. Limited Ruse says, I take my Network Plus exam today. Always using your content. Thank you so much. Best of luck with that exam. It's going to go great. You're going to do fine. It's going to do wonderful. You follow the rules. The rules are you get the exam objectives. You read through all of the exam objectives. If you know everything that's listed in those exam objectives, you're going to pass your exam. That's it. Now, how you learn everything that's in those objectives, that's the hard part. But if you do that, you will pass your exam. So I feel pretty good for you. Other folks are checking in. Outdoor More says, have Security Plus on the 31st of May. Boy, you're planning ahead. You're planning much farther ahead than I ever do with my planning. Good for you. I guess a lot of people do that, though. Before they start their studies, and this is a pretty good strategy, really, is they book their exam. Now, of course, we all know that, 24 hours, 48 hours before, you can change your exam. You can push it further out if you want to. You can modify when the exam is going to happen. But it's sort of it's now locked in. It's on the calendar. You know this day is approaching, and you can set up kind of a study plan towards that date, which is a great strategy. So that may be something a lot of people might want to try. I'm the kind of person who I never know when I'm done. So I kind of have to wait until I get through everything. And then finally, when I get through everything, then I go ahead and set the date. I'm just, I'm too flighty that way. I'm too all over the place. So there you go. Rick asked the question, this is a frequently asked question of, hey, the Cisco Certified Network Administrator, is that a replacement for Network Plus? And it seems like they're both networking, so they're pretty much the same thing, right? No, they are not. They're very different. Network Plus is really an entry-level cert. CCNA is not an entry-level cert, to be completely clear. It is probably next step up from Network Plus. And then, of course, there's many other places to go from there. That's not the end. You just keep going. Just keep going up, 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 up. So that's what I say. So that's the idea. Let's see what else we got going on here. We got about 2 minutes to go. Let's do a final check. I think I have graphics all set. Let's check the graphics. If I got the graphics set up, what have I done? What is going on? I'll tell you in a moment. Yeah, it looks good. This is March. This is Network Plus. Yeah, graphics are super awesome. We are great. This is turning into an after show before we get the actual show going. Ankit says, how can I keep myself motivated? Is there something about the information that seems too much for me to store in my head? This is one of those where there is a lot in all of these certification exams, regardless of which one you're taking. This is not something specific to Network Plus or CompTIA. It's just in general in the industry. These certification exams are big. There's a lot to remember. You got to break it down into smaller pieces. Do it a single video at a time. That's why I made them that way, because if they're 10 to 15 minutes long, you can get the idea from this. And a lot of people look at those videos and say, well, they're only 10 to 15 minutes long. What kind of course is this? But then you look at the entirety of the course and it's, tens of hours long, and you realize, oh no, there's quite a bit of content here. I'm just breaking it up into smaller pieces. So that's why. All right, we got 30 seconds to go. Let's get a presentation on my screen. That looks super good. What else? What else we got going on? This all looks nice. I need to get this now. Your chat needs to go back to whence it came. Let's bring up, I think I just close it. Close the chat. Yep, magically appears over here. Let's pop it out again because actually I think I want the chat over here. I want this part over there. We are in good shape now. So it's time for a live stream, isn't it? Top of the hour, as they say on St. Patrick's Day. That's not what they say. So it's time. It's time to do a live stream, and away we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 2023 Professor Messer N10-008 Network Plus Study Group. This is the live stream study group where I ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. And if you are here live and online, you can answer live and online. If you're not watching this live, you can follow along with us to see if you can get the questions right on this exam. There's a lot to know for Network Plus. We were just talking about that in the pre-show. This might be a good time to look over some of these topics, see where you might need a little extra study, see where you might have all of these topics down pat, and then you can decide what you need to do next with your studies. We have a lot to go through today. In this first hour, I will be asking you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. In the second part of the hour, the second hour, not really the part of the hour, but the entire second hour, I'll take questions from the chat room so that we're able to ask any questions you might have about Network Plus, about technology, about really anything you would like to talk about. We've got a lot of things to go through, not just with the normal questions on the exam for multiple choice, but I have some performance-based questions, and we have other topics we can talk about as well. As you are getting settled, and if you are here live, we would love it if you could participate with us. To do that, pop open a new browser window and go to this URL, professormesser.com/QA. That is the QA that there'll be a question waiting for you if you type that in correctly. There's also an app that you can use, because of course there is. This app is called the Socrative Student app. You can get that in your favorite app store, regardless of what type of platform you are on. If you use the app, it will ask you for a room name. The room name is Professor Messer, all one word, PROFESSORMESSER. That will get you to the right place, and you will see a question waiting for you. We call this our rewind question because it's one we did last month. We want to see if you're able to get into the answer, the Q&A answer page, because the question there asks, a network technician needs to determine the total length of an installed Ethernet cable. Which of the following would provide this functionality? Is it tone generator, crimper, punch-down tool, TDR, or inductive probe? A network technician needs to determine the total length of an installed Ethernet cable. Which of the following would provide this functionality? Is it a tone generator, a crimper, a punch-down tool, a TDR, or an inductive probe? If you think you know the answer, you go to the link that's on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, and that will get you to where you need to be. Now, what's really great about doing a live stream is that you never know what's going to happen. You never know how things are going to go. You never know what type of things may be happening. And if I flip over to my presentation, there it is. That's probably not what we're shooting for, by the way. The laptop that I use to provide my presentation has turned off completely. So go ahead and go through that process. I'm going to bring up another presentation. There's always a plan B, people. We've always got some other thing to do. Now, I'm worried my poor MacBook has seen better days and it's no longer with us. So it is, or it could be that I just kicked the power cable out, which happens as well. But that's okay because I have the entire presentation on the same screen. We can just flip back and forth. So there's always a plan. Oh, and it's booted back up. As soon as I threatened it with what I'd like to do, it says that it's booting back up. Look at that. So there I don't know, but there we are. So what I'd like to do is just keep the party going and see if you can answer that question. We're going to come back to that question in just a moment. In the meantime, I've got this presentation up on the other screen just in case I might need to do something like that. This is not my new MacBook. This is one of the older Intel MacBooks, which, by the way, are nice to keep around if you can do different things on it that you may not be able to do on the M1 or M2 Macs, which are pretty nice. Thank you, everyone in the chat room, for your troubleshooting. This is why a group of people who are smart technologists can help regardless of what's going on. Thank you for being here. We do one of these study groups every month. If you'd like to participate, you can see what's available on our website at professormesser.com/calendar. But of course, when we're not on the live streams, you can find all of our videos on YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. I also have a weekly Network Plus pop quiz question. We usually do those on Tuesdays. You'll find it at professormesser.com/Twitter or professormesser.com/Instagram. Either one of those would work pretty well. We're going to talk today about the Network Plus exam. The Network Plus exam is currently the N10-008. That is the version number of the exam. You need to make sure all of your study materials have that version number on them to make sure that you are studying the right information for this exam. This exam was released on September the 15th of 2021, which means we think it will retire somewhere around March of 2025. That's an estimate, but as we get closer to that date, which right now is pretty far away, we'll adjust those time frames just to make sure. This exam is one single exam. It's 90 minutes long with a maximum of 90 questions. You might get fewer than 90, and you need to score a 720, which is on a scale from 100 to 900. Yeah, I don't get it either, but there it is. That's what we have to do. They really don't worry so much about the scoring process. What you should focus on is doing the best you can. The score is going to work itself out at the end anyway. And the exam also is a mix of different question types. We'll talk more about this in a moment. You'll get multiple choice-based questions, but you'll also get performance-based questions, so you never know exactly what you might run into. Of course, on our website, we have the entire course available for you to watch online for free. There's no paywall. There's nothing you have to register. You simply go to YouTube and you watch any video that you might want. Of course, we have an offline version of these videos. We have course notes and we have so much more. You can check out our success bundle at professormesser.com/netsuccess. There's also a replay available in an audio form. We put it in a podcast format that's available on our website right after we're done here. I process that. It usually takes, well, less than a day to get that posted. You'll find that at professormesser.com/podcast. I have podcast links there for my A+ study groups, my Network Plus study group, and my Security Plus study group. That's at professormesser.com/podcast. We also have video replays available immediately after this. They are automatically rendered by YouTube and placed online in just a few minutes. You'll find those available. And if you wait about a day, you'll notice in the YouTube video description that, like magic, suddenly there are timestamps available with everything that we did. Well, like most things that are magic, it doesn't happen with no user intervention. There's humans. In this case, my marketing manager, Lori, has to listen to this whole thing and put in all the timestamps. Hey, Lori. Hopefully, you're finding some use for those. You can now go back years on our study groups to be able to find what that might be. So she's watching the chat. She's looking at this video probably at 2x speed, finding exactly where those timestamps might be and adding them to the YouTube video description. Thank you, Lori. That is something a lot of people have already mentioned to me they use quite a bit. So a great use of time to be able to do that. Another thing that you might find is when we are not here in this live stream, you will certainly find us over on the Discord. Our Discord is available at professormesser.com/Discord. If you haven't used Discord before, it is a sort of a combination of an online chat and a screen and audio sharing service so that you're able not only to ask questions of people in the chat, but occasionally there will be people that will study together in the voice or video sharing. Lots of great people on our community there. Find out more at professormesser.com/Discord. Eventually, you're going to need to take your exam. And of course, you can go to the CompTIA website and pay full price for your exam. But what I've done is take exactly the same vouchers and put them on my site and gave you a discounted price for those so you don't have to pay full price. This is primarily for people that are in the U.S., Canada, or a number of U.S. territories. This is something that not only save you a little money, but if you purchase the voucher on my site, you get my Exam Hacks ebook for free. This is a set of tips and tricks that I've accumulated through the years after taking what I guess I estimate to be 20 to 25 different industry exams throughout the years. This Exam Hacks ebook gives you some tips on things you can do for studying, but it also gives you some tips on things you can do during the exam that might get you a few extra points. And sometimes a few extra points is really what you need. It can make the difference between passing and failing. Find out more about those. Find our discounted vouchers. You don't need special codes. You don't need a coupon number. You don't need a special addition or an extension to your browser. Simply go to professormesser.com/vouchers. Now let's go back to that question we asked earlier. A network technician needs to determine the total length of an installed Ethernet cable. Which of the following would provide this functionality? Is it a tone generator, a crimper, let me see if I can push the right button, a punch down tool, a TDR, or an inductive probe? It's got to be one of those. Let's see what you think the right answer is. 65% of you, now 66, say it's a TDR. So 2/3 of you are leaning towards answer D, a TDR. 17% said an inductive probe. 12% said a tone generator. And then we have 3% that said crimper, and only 2% said a punch down tool. What we were looking for here was the total length of an installed Ethernet cable. So total length is a pretty important thing to know about, especially when you take these and use them for wires that are in the wall. You can't physically see the wire, but you would really like to know just how long is this Ethernet cable. Well, that's a perfect task for a time domain reflectometer, or a TDR. It's perfect for estimating lengths. It gets pretty accurate at estimating those cable lengths, something that's available there. It can also tell you if there have been splices in the cable, because it can recognize when there's a little bit of resistance in the cable, tell you about the impedance of the cable so you can verify you're using the right cable type, and it will tell you if it's losing signal and how much between point A and point B. So you've got all kinds of different options and different things available using a TDR. If you were doing this on a network that was fiber-based, then you would need an OTDR, which is an optical time domain reflectometer. So these are relatively expensive when you compare them to something like a simple cable tester, but they provide you with so much more. And if you're working with a professional cable company and you're asking them to verify their installations, they're usually using something like a TDR or an OTDR to provide those verifications. So you know the cable that they're putting in is going to be able to support the version of the type of signal that's going across that wire. Can this cable support 100 megabit Ethernet? Can it support gigabit Ethernet? Can it support 10 gigabit Ethernet? You'll know if you're using a TDR on that link. But more importantly, it will tell you how long the cable is. And that's really one of the most fundamental functionalities of a TDR. And that is indeed the right answer. D, 66% of you chose TDR. Now, why wouldn't it be an inductive probe or tone generator? Those two, of course, are used side by side. We usually will put the tone generator onto one end of a cable and then take the inductive probe over to where we think the other end of the cable might be, and we simply start touching cables until we hear the tone that is being generated on the other end of that cable. That is useful to find a cable, but it doesn't tell you how long the cable is. Is the cable 20 meters long, or is it 100 meters long? An inductive probe and a tone generator simply don't provide that level of detail. We also have crimpers and punch-down tools. Crimpers, of course, are used to put the connectors onto the end of a cable, whether that is a coax or an RJ45 twisted pair or RJ11 twisted pair. We've also got punch-down tools. Those are used to fasten those wires into punch-down blocks. Neither one of those tells you anything about the length of the cable. So in this case, the only answer that makes any sense, the one that is the correct answer, and the one you did much better this month, by the way, is the TDR. 66% of you selected time domain reflectometer, and you got that one absolutely correct. Well done. Well, I mentioned earlier on this exam that there are multiple ways that questions could be asked of you on this exam. Now, the question we just did, there it is a multiple choice based question. So I ask you a question, and there are multiple options to choose from. Even if you didn't know the answer, you could have gotten a 20% chance of getting it 100% right. So there is a validity to guessing, because you might get some free points out of guessing on this exam. But there's a handful of questions you get at the beginning of the exam that are not multiple choice. They are anything but multiple choice. They might be fill in the blank. They might be matching. They might be drag and drop. They might be putting things in a particular order on the screen. But it all comes from the exam objectives. And what I tell people is don't worry about how they're asking the question. As long as you know the content of the exam objectives, they can ask the questions however they'd like. You already know the answers. So don't worry so much that you're not going to know how to handle these multiple choice questions and performance-based questions. You're going to do just fine for both of those types. Now, what we do at the very first new question of every study group is I have for you a performance-based question of the month. So let's do our performance-based question of the month now. This one is really a fill in the blank. I'm not giving you any type of hints with this one. The only thing that is our standing rule is please no answers in the chat room and please no hints in the chat room. Our performance-based question of the month asks, what classes are associated with these IP addresses? So I have for you 5 different IP addresses. You just tell me what class it is. So I'm not telling you what they could be. I'm just telling you what the class is. So, or asking you what the class is. So the first IP address is 224.0.0.251. The second one is 190.10.220.7. The third is 88.16.177.192. The fourth number is 217.7.14.99. And the last number is 128.167.198.1. I guess I should use the same style with all of these as I go through. So those, again, for those of you listening on the podcast, these 5 IP addresses are 224.0.0.251, 190.10.220.7, 88.16.177.192, 217.7.14.99, and 128.167.198.1. And again, of course, no answers in the chat room, please. No hints in the chat room. We're going to figure out what these happen to be. And if you think you know the answer, you can simply use the link at the bottom of your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to answer this particular question. See if you happen to know what it is. Now, I'm not even going to give you hints on this one because it is a fill in the blank, although I will tell you on the A+ exam, the Network Plus exam, and the Security Plus exams, I've not yet seen a fill in the blank. Now, there have been other exams from CompTIA that have used fill in the blank, so I won't say that that would never happen on the exam, but so far I haven't seen many instances. I haven't seen any instances of that for Network Plus. So I'm not going to tell you what the possibilities are here for this one. This one could just as easily be a drag and drop. It could be a one where you click and have a pull down menu and you choose from the pull down menu, but I didn't want to give you that much information. First, you're going to need to know what an IP class is. You're going to need to understand how those IP addresses are classed, and then you'll need to tell me what that class is. So I'm not telling you if those are colors or letters or numbers or whatever it happens to be. You have to know that part. So I'm not going to give you anything more than you think you have to be able to do. So it should be a good one to step through. A number of you are locking in your answers now. I see these coming in. This is something that is very useful when you're starting the process of understanding subnetting, where you're given an IP address, you need to break that IP address into many different pieces. This is very useful to know. Knowing the class is not very useful in practical terms and using the network, but very useful in knowing how was this IP address originally assigned on the network. That's probably as much as I will tell you about the hints associated with this one. So see if you know what this one happens to be. Let's step through each one of these and see if we can figure out what these classes are. Now, one thing that's interesting about determining an IP class is that you have to know or have to reference only the first, what we call octet of the IP address. That is everything in this first number of the IP address. So for instance, in the first IP address, it's 224. The second one is 190. The other one, third is 88. The fourth is 217. And the last is 128. Whatever else is in the address for the purposes of this question is irrelevant. We only need to know the very first number, and then we associate that very first number with a particular range, which tells us what that particular class is associated with that IP address. And so what I've done is I put on the screen that chart so you can see what is Class A and what's that range. Class B, Class C, Class D, and Class E. Now, technically, the classes are determined based on the first 4 bits of the IP address. So you'd have to take 224, convert that to binary, look at the first 4 bits, and you'd be able to match those to Class A, B, C, D, or E. And you do that for every number. But could you imagine trying to do this on an exam in real time and do it quickly by converting all of the numbers to binary and comparing the binary representation? We don't have time for that. It's so much easier if we can remember what the different ranges are for that first number. So for example, a Class A address has a range from 1 to 127. Class B is 128 to 191. Class C is 192 to 223. Class D is 224 to 239. And Class E is 240 to 254. Well, that makes it super easy then. If you're someone who is trying to determine what the class is, you simply need to look at the first number, see where it fits into that chart, and then you'd be able to tell what the class is. So that might be very, very useful if you're working on doing something like that. So let's do the first one. Let's look at it. It's 224.0.0.251. We look at the first number, 224. We go to our chart and we try to determine where does 224 sit. And you can see indeed Class C is a range between 224 and 239. Therefore, This particular 224.0.0.251 is a Class D address. And for those of you that have done multicast on your network, first, I'm very sorry, but sometimes we have to do those things. It's a whole different set of management and configuring of networks when there's multicast on a network, isn't there? So what's also nice about that is you may have recognized that 224 address right away. It's a very common octet used for multicast communication. And indeed, Class D is multicast. So that makes sense for this particular case. That would be a multicast address, and that is Class D. So our first IP address up here is indeed Class D. Our next IP address is 190.10.220.7. Again, we look at the first number, 190. We go to our chart. We try to figure out where we would fit 190 into all these numbers. And you can see Class B addresses are from 128 to 191. That certainly covers the entire range that includes 190. So therefore, our second IP address of 190.10.220.7 is a Class B address. Next on our list, the third one is 88.16.177.192. Again, we take the 88. We have a look at all of the different numbers on our chart, and 88 certainly fits into the Class A range between 1 and 127. So we can associate Class A with that IP address. Next on our list, 217.7.14.99. We have 217 is the number we want to find. 217 fits into this Class C range between 192 and 223, so we can associate a Class C address with that one. And then lastly, we have 128.167.198.1. We look at that first octet, 128. We look at our list of what's available. 128 is in the range that Class B uses from 128 to 191. So in that particular case, we would associate that with Class B. That's how hard it is to determine what the class of this happens to be. Now, obviously, there are default subnet masks that we use to associate with classes of addresses, but these days we don't do that any longer. We use any type of subnet mask that you would like to use, but everything starts with the class-based subnet mask. So it helps you when you're troubleshooting or doing some type of subnetting to get a feel for what the subnet mask happens to be. You at least know where it started and what a subsequent subnet mask might be associated with that. So that's a real key, is knowing the classes of those addresses. Now, as some people are mentioning in the chat room, there is a difference between the class of address and whether the address is a public address or a private address. So you should separate those different categorizations of addresses because they are very different. They handle different scenarios, but you also have to know and memorize public versus private IP addresses as well, which we don't do in this question. This one was only about classes. I didn't, but now you've given me a great idea. So next time I do one of these, which is usually in about a year, I'm probably going to ask, what is the class, and is it a public or private address? So you've now made it more difficult for those that are following you. Congratulations. But I think that's a useful thing to know as well. It might be useful to put that on there. Maybe we do that next month. So study up. You never know when you might get a question about public addresses, private addresses, and classes of addresses and how they might in some way be used together. They're not really used together very much. But it certainly helps with the subnetting part of this. So those of you that Gary gave me the idea in the chat room. So thanks, Gary. Appreciate that. Thank you. This is when I mentioned in a year, I usually rotate through these performance-based questions every year. I write them with different questions and answers, but they're very similar in style. So if you go back to March of last year, you'll probably also see there is a class question there for classes of IP addresses, but it's a different set of IP addresses. So there's only so many performance-based questions you can kind of fit in there. So hopefully you're familiar with these classes. This is something you're familiar with. That was your first performance-based question of the day. It's the last one I have for you of the day. Sorry about that. But we can do more because we have more multiple choice-based questions to come as well. Why don't we jump into one right now? Our next question is this one that asks, a database administrator is configuring a MySQL database for a new application. What port number would most likely be used by this service? Is it TCP 3306, TCP 1433, TCP 443, TCP 1521, or TCP 3389? Ooh, a port number question right off the top. Let's see if we know what this is. A database administrator is configuring a MySQL database for a new application. What port number would most likely be used by this service? Is it TCP 3306, TCP 1433, TCP 443, TCP 1521, or TCP 3389? If you think you know the answer, please put your answer in this link that's right here, professormesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer there. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. We'll instead run through and know what these happen to be. Maybe you know what some of these port numbers are. So if you're not quite certain what this one is asking for, maybe you know what they aren't. Maybe you can get rid of some on the list. And of course, every time you get rid of one of these answers, it increases your possibility of maybe guessing at the answer when we get there. So that might help too. See if you can work through these. For those of you that were in the pre-show, you were asking about the version of the exam. So having some feel for the N10-008. Well, this list of databases, and there's not just a single database port on the exam, there's a number of database ports you need to know. Those were added to this most recent version. Another great reason to always have the latest set of exam objectives and use all the study materials that are specific to the version of the exam that you're planning to take. You would never want to study from previous study materials and then walk into the latest exam to try to take this exam. You're not going to go very, very well with that at all. You're going to have very bad grades on that particular one. Very easy to fail an exam when you're missing 30 to 40% of the content. So you don't want to be in that position where you have to hope and guess that you're going to make your way through it. We'll have to see if that's the way it works through. Hopefully that can help you know how to work through these as well. Some of you in the chat room have been saying, yep, port numbers, they are a challenge, because if you've never worked in networking before, you've probably never had to work with these port numbers. So you're sort of facing this rote memorization process right out of the gate, because these are very early on in the exam objectives. And unfortunately, that is sort of a problem. So those of you that are trying to work through these port numbers and you've never touched the network port numbers, you've never configured a firewall, you've never had to do this on your own firewalls, then this is a little bit of a problem. So I do recommend to people, if you're working through this, please go through and become familiar with the different options that are available. I think this is something that can really help you when you're walking through the exams, is to know what different things should I be ready for on this exam, and maybe try putting these port numbers into rules that are on your personal firewall or with firewalls you may be using. It's a good practice to be able to use this. Let's see how you did with this question. This question asked, a database administrator is configuring a MySQL database for a new application. What port number would most likely be used by this service? Is it TCP 3306, TCP 1433, TCP 443, TCP 1521, or TCP 3389. Let's see how you answered this one. 37% of you say TCP 3306. We have 23% of you that say TCP 1433. We have 16% that said TCP 3389. And we've got 12% each that says TCP 1433 and TCP 443. So we're really not sure about databases and how we would use databases in this scenario. So it might be good if we step through what some of these databases are that we could be faced with and what the port numbers might be associated with this. So let's start with Microsoft. Microsoft has one of the most common databases that you will find used in our corporations and organizations today. And Microsoft called it the Microsoft SQL Server. Or as we say here in the South, that's the Squirrel Server. The Microsoft SQL Server, it stands for, of course, Structured Query Language. That is the language that is used by these databases. And the Microsoft version of Microsoft SQL Server, which is an exceptional relational database, by the way, extremely powerful in how they operate, uses a default port number of TCP 1433. So if we look back, that was one of the possible answers, 1433. 23% of you chose 1433, but that wasn't the SQL we were looking for. We were looking for MySQL. So it's definitely not 1433. We can rule that one out straight away. Another relational database you need to know is the Oracle SQLnet. Most people just call it Oracle. Or are you running Oracle, which not very accurate because Oracle's the name of a company that has many, many different products available. Just calling it Oracle doesn't really tell anyone what you're doing with it. Oracle Net, Oracle Net 8, or Oracle Databases would be a much more accurate way to represent this. It uses a default port number of TCP 1521. TCP 1521, well, that sounds familiar because there was an option here for TCP 1521 that was answer D, and now we know that's not the right answer. 12% of you chose that one, but that's for Oracle. That's not MySQL database, or at least in this particular case, the Oracle MySQL. There's a big story there too. We can go back and forth over that one because Oracle has acquired, or many years ago, acquired MySQL, which is a free and open source database. If you're on ProfessorMesser.com right now, then you're taking advantage of the Oracle MySQL database functionality. This is why I tell people, just don't say you have an Oracle database, because Oracle has many different databases to be able to use this. MySQL, though, the default port numbers that it uses is TCP 3306. That is the default port number for MySQL. And indeed, we have TCP 3306 as our first option. Option A, that is the right answer. 38% of you, which was the plurality of you answering this question, did get this one correct. If you answered TCP 3306, you got it spot on. You need to know all of these database types and all of the database ports as you step through this exam. So make sure you're familiar with all of those. And you'll notice in the exam objectives, they only put the number, the port number. So they only put 3306 or 1433 or 1521. But I will tell you, and the reason I put TCP or UDP as a precursor to those is because it's incredibly important to know, especially when you step into a networking job where you have to allow or disallow certain types of traffic. You need to know whether that's TCP or UDP. So that's why you'll see that on all of my materials. There is, of course, other options that we did not have in this list already. One of those was TCP 443. That was sort of a gimme for those of you familiar, because that, of course, is web browsing over an encrypted channel. So if you're running HTTPS, then you're probably using TCP 443. And for those of you familiar with Microsoft's remote desktop protocol, then you're probably familiar with TCP 3389. 16% of you chose that one. Not the correct answer. What we were indeed looking for is TCP 3306. So that is what we were hunting down, trying to figure out. 39%, a pretty good number, though. So I think a number of you were up to date with your port numbers. And those of you that didn't get it right, this is your opportunity to now become up to date with those as well. That's where, if you're ever in the case where you're trying to figure out a port number, that's why I mentioned maybe there's some of these in here you do recognize, you could get rid of them. So you could have gotten rid of 443, that's web browsing, that's secure web browsing, TCP 3389, that's remote desktop. So that leaves you 3 to choose from. It's just that all 3 of those were databases, so it didn't quite make it as easy as maybe you would have hoped. But that's what the exam does too. So these aren't easy questions to answer. They do throw in things that really make you think about the answers. So make sure you're familiar with those and how you would work through all of that for Network Plus. So let's do another question. I have them available in this next one. Asks the question, a network administrator would like to prevent loops on their switched network. Which of the following should be configured on the switches? Should I configure VLAN, port security, RSTP, lag, or flow control? A network administrator would like to prevent loops on their switched network. Which of the following should be configured on the switches? Is it VLAN, port security, RSTP, lag, or flow control? If you think you know the answer, please no answers in the chat room. You want to instead go to the link that's on your screen, ProfessorMesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer. Please no hints in the chat room either. Please don't insinuate anything in the chat room. Please don't mention anything in the chat room. Please pretend that the chat room's not even there. Please, I'm not even sure how to say it any differently. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. Well, this is as if we are sitting at the exam. We are ready to take the exam. And of course, in the exam room, you don't have anything available to you. You don't have anything that you might want to work through. So hopefully that might help you as well. And that's really the key. So hopefully you can figure that out. Yeah, one of the things that if you ever step through this, that the online system allows you to answer multiple answers. Obviously, that's not important for us. So I don't generally ask you multiple answer questions on here just to keep things easy. And if this is the easy part, and then of course you have to remember what you answered because it doesn't tell you once you lock it in. At least it didn't used to. Maybe some of you can tell me, no, once I lock it in, you can't see what you selected. Maybe somebody can confirm that. I've been asking them to put that into the product because this is the third-party product we use to synchronize all of those things up. But hopefully that can give you a perspective. In the meantime, also, before we go this answer, I want to thank Isaac in the chat room with a $5 super chat, who's so nice. He says, a hero for everyone. I'm assuming you're referring to Mrs. Professor Messer because she's the one that actually makes all of this happen. I'm just sitting here in front of the camera, quite honestly. I'm the talking head. Somebody has to make sure this whole machine keeps running. There's plenty of people behind the scenes. So you've got Lori, you've got Mrs. Professor Messer, you've got a whole crew of folks that are trying to keep me propped up in front of this camera and keep things going, and they're doing a fine job. So thank you, though. I appreciate that, Isaac. And thanks also for the super chat and your support as well. Let's see how we do with this question. Let's really break this one down into the different pieces. This question asks, a network administrator would like to prevent loops on their switched network. Which of the following should be configured on these switches? Is it VLAN, port security, RSTP, lag, or flow control? So let's see what you answered, what the answer might be. Let's choose show results, and you can see 56% of you say that the answer is RSTP. We have 23% of you, nearly a quarter, that say flow control. We've got 10% that say VLAN, and then 6% that say port security, which is effectively tied for last place with lag at 5%. So hopefully that gives you an idea what other people have said here, but what is the right answer? So, of course, we're trying to prevent loops on a switch networks. Loops, generally speaking, in networking are something we would like to avoid. And most often, the type of loops that you will see on a network are either loops that are made on the switching network or loops that are made on the routing network. So you never know exactly where the problem is sometimes, so you have to break them down into smaller pieces. Now, in this question, it specifically says we want to prevent loops on a switched network. So we're not dealing with routing loops here, thankfully. Routing loops can be annoying and difficult to troubleshoot too, but there's a relatively easy way to make sure that your switch network is not going to accidentally create a loop by plugging in the wrong cables into your switches. And one of the best ways to do that is with the spanning tree protocol, or the most recent version of the spanning tree protocol, which is called the rapid spanning tree protocol. If you wanted the IEEE standard for this, it's 802.1W, although that's certainly not necessary. I don't believe that's in the exam objectives, but we might want to check that out to see if it is in the exam objectives, just to make sure that I'm not telling you wrong. But there's a number of things you need to know. And for the exam objectives, if we look for STP on the exam objectives or a loop, I don't think I see any mention of that. Okay, well, one of the things that I would like to step through then is what these different things in RSTP might do for us then. Now, why did we suddenly come up with a new version of STP? The spanning tree protocol is very useful because it prevents someone from plugging into the network and effectively bringing the entire network down, which, got to tell you, that's pretty helpful. I've worked places where they did not have spanning tree turned on, and there were a number of accidents that occurred because of that, with people just accidentally plug in the wrong cable, you create a loop, and then suddenly the entire network fails. So this gives us, when we first introduced spanning tree, we would plug in a device. It might take 30 to 50 seconds just for that device to finally be live on the network and start operating. Well, these days, that's a very long time. 30 to 50 seconds. So we made it so that it was a much faster time to get onto the network. We call this the convergence time. And we got that down to about 6 seconds by using this newer version of STP called the rapid STP, the rapid spanning tree protocol. Now, fortunately, it will work with older equipment that doesn't know the rapid part. It just knows the older STP part. So that's really great. So if you're someone who is trying to answer or integrate all of these different switches together, and some are older and some are newer, it's okay. You can still run rapid STP and it'll work just fine with everything else that's there. So make sure you're familiar with the spanning tree protocol. I go into much more detail in my video, which is in section 2.3, spanning tree protocol. Might help you a bit with the things you're working on. And it's one that becomes extremely useful as you step through the implementation of a switched network. It can save you a lot of problems. It can solve a lot of accidents for you and make sure that nobody suffers any downtime just by enabling rapid spanning tree protocol on your switches. It's really that easy. Now you have to make sure your network is designed properly, but as you're going to be a network administrator and network designer, you're going to be planning out these network designs. You're going to engineer it the proper way so that you can implement rapid spanning tree protocol. That is the right answer. If you answered C, 57% of you got that one absolutely correct. 23% of you said flow control. And flow control is certainly useful for telling a station to either go faster or slow down. That's what flow control is designed to do, to make sure that you're able to receive all the data you need to receive or send all the data that you need to send. You can have devices talk to each other that say, whoa, you're sending information way too fast. Can you slow this down a little bit for me? So there's a number of different very useful functions associated with flow control, and flow control, a very generic term that's used on different types of networking configurations and different protocols. You'll find flow control implemented across many different types of protocols. One great place to start is TCP, where you can implement flow control on those, and there's others within Ethernet itself. There's a lot we could go into with flow control, but in this case, flow control doesn't stop loops. It only stops the speed at which you are sending or receiving information. 9% of you said VLAN, a virtual local area network, is a way to separate different broadcast domains on the same physical switch, which is fantastic. We don't need multiple switches just to be able to separate out different departments within a building, for example. We can use one physical switch and simply configure the switch so that different interfaces are associated with different VLANs, and it automatically keeps them separated, which are great to be able to have on a single switch, but it doesn't prevent loops. And that's what we were trying to do with this question. We also have port security, which is a great feature to prevent people from simply walking up to a switch and plugging in their own device and gaining access to the network, which prevents, that's obviously prevents unauthorized access to the network or helps prevent that. It does not prevent loops, however. So that would not be the right answer. And then lastly, a lag. Not really referring to someone being slow. That's an abbreviation. Link aggregation is what that refers to. When somebody says, yeah, I put a lag between those switches. Like, oh, okay. Wonder what they're talking about. There's a lag. Is it a stick? Is there a pole? What's a lag? That's what it is. It's link aggregation. They put multiple Ethernet connections between switches and said use those multiple connections as if they were one large aggregated link. So link aggregation, literally the abbreviation that we're dealing with there, but link aggregation does not prevent loops. So that would not be what we would use to prevent loops on the switch network either. In this case, the only answer that makes sense is the one answered C that 56% of you chose for rapid spanning tree protocol. That is exactly what we were looking for. So well done, those of you that answered C. As you can already tell, there is so much you need to know on this exam. There is extensive information we have to go through. If you look at my exam, my exam course, it's 93 videos. I mentioned earlier, these are 15 to 20 minute videos, 10 to 15 minute videos. And people often say, how good can it be? Well, it's 93 videos with 14 hours of content. And I will put that 14 hours of content up against any other Network Plus training course that you'll ever find, because we take everything that's in the exam objectives. It is specific to this version of the exam, and we break it down for you in the video series. But of course, that's a lot of videos and it's a lot of time. And I don't expect that everyone will be in a situation where they can go through all of this content for everything they need to know, so that you know subnetting and fiber connectors and rapid spanning tree protocol and subnetting and topologies and everything else. So what I did was take everything from my videos, I put them in one single book. This is my Network Plus N10-008 course notes. The course notes are available in this digital form that you see on the screen. This is a PDF. They're also available in a physical edition. You'll find links to both of those on the information page on my website. Of course, it's exactly the same information, just presented in a different form, either a physical printed book that's in color and nicely bound with the perfect binding on it, or you can have this digital version. By the way, if you get the physical edition, you get the digital edition for free along with it. So while you're waiting on this to be delivered to you, because we do ship this to you, you can go ahead and download immediately and start using this content. Put it on your mobile devices, put it on your computer at home, wherever you happen to be. You will have all of this text, all of the great graphics, all of the tables that I've created specifically for this course are available in this set of course notes. You'll find out more on my website. Simply visit professormesser.com/NPCN for more information about the course notes. Before we go to the next question, I want to thank Travis in the chat room with the $19.99 super chat. Thank you, Travis. That was very generous, and no specific message on there, but I sure appreciate the support. Everything we do here revolves around keeping the lights on and keeps everything going. So I appreciate anyone who is helping support what we do. We'll just keep paying it forward. We'll just use that for the other folks that are coming in. I also want to thank the visionary with the $10 super chat who says, my first Network Plus live stream. Welcome. I'm so used to hearing you at 1.25x speed. Me too, as it turns out, because that's the speed I go at when I'm editing these videos. When will we see Network Plus practice exams? Well, that we'll get something out to you soon. We'd love to get some practice exams done for Network Plus. So just keep looking out for something along those lines. He says, thanks for all you do, Professor Messer. You're more than welcome. Thank you for the $10 super chat. We appreciate that support. And also, we have Brian in the chat room with the $10 super chat who says, I'm taking Network Plus Thursday. Truly believe your study groups helped me greatly in passing both the A+ cores. Keep it up. Your team is awesome. I think the same thing about this team here. It's great that we're able to take something that people are able to use, that they can use to get a job, get a better job, and really take control of their career. And as we've already heard from people, it can change people's lives. So we want to keep that going as long as we possibly can. So we're going to keep doing that. And thank you, Brian, for helping with that effort and that $10 super chat. Let's do another question. The next question on this list is this one that asks, a company is activating their disaster recovery plan and has shipped equipment, software, and technicians to a remote location. Which of the following would best describe this recovery site? Would it be a hot site, cold site, active-active, cloud site, or warm site? Got a few options there. The question again asks, a company is activating their disaster recovery plan and has shipped equipment, software, and technicians to a remote location. Which of the following would best describe this recovery site? Is it a hot site, cold site, active-active, cloud site, or warm site? If you think you know the answer, follow the link, professormesser.com/QA. There it is on your screen. Follow that link, lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. Be able to find out what the different options might be. See if you can lock it in. See if you know what this one happens to be. This is one where it does become important to know nuance. And of course, all of these are very similar to each other. So now we have to really break down the question and find out which one fits the best. Voss in the chat room says, I can't afford a super chat at the moment. That's okay. You don't have to super chat. That's not expected for you to be here. I just wanted to come by and say thank you. It's a different course. Thanks. I just passed my A+ Core 1 on Thursday. Congratulations on your Core 1. So hopefully you'll be able to work through the ideas that are in your Core 2. I'm assuming you've got to take Core 2 next. So best of luck with your Core 2 studies. And I'll bet eventually you'll be jumping into Network Plus 2. We'll have to see how that goes. So see if that makes sense for what you're working through. Let's see how we're doing with folks locking their questions in. I think a number of folks might know this one, and see what the options happen to be. This is a pretty good one. And this is, I have been in this situation where a disaster has occurred. I have been in living and working in Miami. Hurricanes come through, and now we have to set up shop somewhere else. And in our case, we set up shop, I think it was in Minneapolis or just outside. It was in Minnesota. So we took our data center and we needed to take equipment, software, and technicians to Minnesota to get back up and running. And because we had this type of disaster recovery plan in place. So hopefully that's something that you can work through. Not highly recommended, by the way, but it does work. This is a legitimate plan with certainly the opportunity to bring the network back up and running again. Yeah, so South Florida to Minnesota, absolutely. I want to say it was Minnesota. It was Minnesota. It could have been the Carolinas at that point. We used a lot of different disaster recovery locations, and it was a long time ago. It was during Andrew. So we're talking, what was that, 91? It was a long time ago. But it was one where there's important places that these disaster recovery sites might be. You have to pick a good place. And in this particular case, that's the good place that it was. And it was cold, but it was hot, it was cold, it was active, it was cloud, it was warm. It was one of those. But Minnesota was cold, regardless of what the site was. At that time of year, though, it was probably not as cold. I guess that was August, wasn't it? So the August, September timeframe, you're still probably pretty good. So hopefully that's one that can help you too. So let's see how we did with this one. The question asks, a company is activating their disaster recovery plan and has shipped equipment, software, and technicians to a remote location. Which of the following would best describe this recovery site? Is it a hot site, a cold site, an active site, a cloud site, or a warm site? It's got to be one of those. Let's see what you answered. We click the link. We can see that we've got effectively a two-way tie for first place between hot site and cold site. It's got to be one of those. Or maybe the 17% of you that said warm site, you split the difference. It's not hot, it's not cold, it's just right. It's the warm site. I don't know if just right describes it properly, but it is kind of in the middle of a hot site and a cold site. Then we have these other two, an active site, not really a site so much as a type of redundancy. And then a cloud site, only 7% chose that one. So this is a scenario if we're going into a disaster recovery location and there's nothing there. We're walking into an empty room. We've had to ship our own equipment. We've had to bring our own software and data. We've had to bring our own people because there's no people in the room. We get there, it's an empty room. That's a cold site. That's super cold. There's just nothing there. Now, this is probably not a very accurate representation of a cold site picture because generally it is a data center. There are racks available. There is the normal air conditioning, HVAC, that you would have in these facilities. There's usually an enhanced power, and usually multiple power sources from different locations. So really, it's not an empty building per se. Usually there's a setup, but it's empty racks. It's just tons of racks on the floor that are empty. So what we need now is some way to fill them up. So we need to bring our own data and our own equipment, our own people and everything to be able to make that happen. We'll get that question in just a moment. But there is a really good example of how we have to make sure that we have everything we need to get everything back up and running. And that was really an important part of this, is that we have to be able to, if we don't have equipment in the building, we don't have our data in the building, and we don't have any people in the building, we're going to have to put those in ourselves. So we really are starting cold with a scenario like this, that we have to now bring the site back up and running. So cold site is the right answer. 35% of you answered cold site. If it was a site where we already had equipment running there, we already had copied all of our data there. In fact, we constantly keep that site synchronized with all of our data. It's already running all of our equipment. There may even be people in the room. That's a hot site, which means we could simply flip a switch, so to speak, and move everything from one location to the other in a matter of moments. So there is a benefit to running a hot site. Obviously, the problem here is that for a hot site to be there, we've already had to spend money on it. You have to make sure it stays up and running. You have to have all of these things ready to go. And so I always think it's incredibly important to be able to know what the differences might be, because you might have a scenario where people do have, maybe they already have equipment in place. Maybe they've already put in the network, but they just don't have the data. Or maybe they have the data, but they don't have the equipment. So we need to provide people and hardware. In the scenario where some of the information is in place, some of the people might be there, or some of the equipment is available, that would be in the middle of a hot site and a cold site. That would be a warm site. That doesn't fit in this scenario either, because nothing's there. We had to ship equipment, software, and technicians to get this site up and running. So that's another scenario where it does become complicated when you have a cold site, because there's much more logistics involved, but you didn't have to pay to keep that site up and running this whole time. So maybe it's a good trade-off. Now, some places I have worked do have hot sites running that are complete duplicates. And when they purchase new equipment, when they implement new applications, they are automatically buying twice as many and implementing in at least 2 different places, so that they have that redundancy already there. If a meteor hits the main data center, the other data center is right there ready to go. And that's the beauty of having a hot site in that scenario. Active-active refers to a type of redundancy where 2 different devices, or indeed locations, could be running at the same time. This is very common, of course, on the internet. When you go to the Google machine on the internet, Google, you don't know exactly where you're going in the world and where you're accessing Google, because there are many different locations for Google. So you could consider that kind of an active-active scenario. Everything is active. If one of those Google sites fails, they lose power, something happens to the network connection, it's okay. The other site's right there. So you're fine. You've already got people even accessing that one because it's active-active. And then lastly, a cloud site, which of course is a cloud-based disaster recovery location where you're keeping all of the apps and the interactions between the applications and the data itself all in the cloud. And you could either have that ready to go, or maybe you have somebody who's building it in the cloud after the fact. Maybe you've already created the infrastructure programmatically, and you click one button and say, create the cloud site for us for disaster recovery, and it just builds all of the systems you need automatically, transfers the data, and you're back up and running because you're able to do everything in the cloud. Boy, that one's going to cost you. So in this scenario, though, you've got you're shipping equipment, you're shipping software, and you're shipping technicians. Hopefully you're just flying technicians into the disaster recovery site. That indeed would be a cold site. See, some of you punched in the right answer after the fact. 37% of you answered cold site. That is the one we were looking for. Absolutely. If you are watching this video for continuing education unit credit, I would love to send you an email that would give you or qualify you for a 1 hour of a webinar category CEU. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then this really doesn't apply to you. This is for people that already have their Network Plus or other certifications, or you might be using these CEUs for other reasons. But you have to follow these instructions to earn the CEU. Go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click the Contact Us link, put in your name, your email address. In the subject line, put March 2023, and in the body of the message, on a line by itself, maybe the top line, where nothing else is listed, you can put the super secret code word of the month, cloud site. Cloud site. I guess it's the super secret code words of the month, cloud site. That's what we were looking for. You can also put anything else in there. I read through every single one of these that comes through. So if you'd like to put anything else in the body of that message, I would be glad to read it. Just put on the line by itself, cloud site, so I'm able to find it very quickly. But I do read through every single one of these. Thank you for those of you that have put comments in. I do like reading through them. Unfortunately, I get hundreds of these, so it's difficult to respond back to every single one of them. But I just want to let you know that I do read through all of them. So again, go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click Contact Us, put in your name, your email address. In the subject line, put March 2023, and then in the body of the message, put the words cloud site. And that's it. That's all you have to do. Click send, you're done. And in about a week or so, you will receive an email from me that has been digitally signed that certifies that you must have been here for an hour because you followed the instructions and you knew the super secret code words of the month. That is Cloud Site. Well, I know it's top of the hour, but let's do another question. We're going to go into overtime here because I talked a little bit more than I talked about as much as I normally do. So let's do another question here. And this question asks, before using a wireless network, a user must agree to the terms of use for the network. Which of the following would best describe this process? Is that geofencing, wireless isolation, multi-factor authentication, IoT security, or captive portal? If you think you know the answer, follow the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. The question again asks, before using a wireless network, a user must agree to the terms of use for the network. Which of the following would best describe this process? Is it geofencing, wireless isolation, multi-factor authentication, IoT security, or captive portal? If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. It's got to be one of those, right? See how you do with these. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. Have it all in there. We got a few more things that have kind of popped in since we were here. I want to thank Mezzan in the chat room with the $10 Canadian Super Chat. I will, of course, since you're in Canada, I will let Mrs. Professor Messer know you were here. Those are the rules. Our family's a little bit American, a little bit Canadian. So we got a little bit of everything going on. The super chat from Mezzan says, thanks for all your help, time, and effort. Happy to do it. Always do have a lot of fun doing these live streams. It's even more fun when everybody's here. We kind of chat about the different ideas and different questions and different things. The second hour is usually fantastically humorous. So we'll have to see how we do with some of those in the second hour. Stick around for that because that's usually where the interesting questions come in. The questions that I don't write, the questions that you write to be able to do this. Let's see how you did with this question. It asked, before using a wireless network, a user must agree to the terms of use for the network. Which of the following would best describe this process? Is it geofencing, wireless isolation, multi-factor authentication, IoT security, or captive portal? It's got to be one of those, right? Let's see what you answered. Some of you in the chat room thought this was a gimme. Not really that much of a gimme, is it? 70% of us say that it's E, captive portal. 13% say IoT security. We've also got single digits, 8% for multi-factor authentication, 5% for wireless isolation, and 5% for geofencing. So practically a three-way tie for last place if you're ever working through some of those. This would be where we would focus on those. Now, if 70% say captive portal, is that really what we were looking for, though? Because this is a message that appears where the user has to agree to the terms before gaining access to the network. Well, it's exactly what it is. It's a captive portal. You can't do anything on the network. You are captive until you either agree or log in, authenticate, do something that gets you past this opening screen. So it's very common when you hit a wireless network, you're in a hotel, you're in a coffee shop, and before you gain access to the network, it pops up this message that says, do you agree to our terms and conditions? This is a legality that's actually quite important, especially when people are on a public network and they could be doing anything on this public network, both legally and illegally. So having this type of portal can protect the owner of the wireless network should something illegal happen by a user of that network. Now, technically, there's a lot of technicalities here when you get into the world of law and technology, But of course, that is something that you would want to do before someone gained access. Or maybe this is just a way to prevent access to a network. Maybe you have to authenticate with your username and password just to be able to gain access. That would keep guests off the network and only allow authorized users of the network to gain access. So lots of uses for a captive portal. You'll have to look at the captive portal you're using to determine what is the method that is being used. Are we simply clicking a box, or do we put in our username and password to gain access to that? Then once you put that in, you effectively have access to the network. You can use it. Usually these captive portals will time out after a certain amount of time. I will stay in a hotel, for instance, and I'll agree to the captive portal terms and conditions when I check in at 6 p.m., but then when it gets to 6:01 p.m. the next day, suddenly I lose access to the network and I have to re-authenticate or reapprove my terms and conditions link. So that one would be more of a 24-hour before it times out. So very common to see that on networks. And if you're working through at least some of these things and trying to figure out what the best options might be on your network to either allow or prevent access to the network, well, maybe this is something you can do as well. You can add a captive portal that might give you the control and the security that you're looking for. Everything we went through today on these questions all comes from the CompTIA exam objectives. These are incredibly important. These exam objectives have everything you need to know for the exam, and they are free. Perhaps even more importantly, the exam objectives themselves are available on the CompTIA website, and you can see they are extensive. They tell you everything you need to know. And as I tell people on these live streams, if you know everything on these bullets, if you know every single bullet that's listed in every single section of the exam objectives, you're going to pass your exam. That is it. That's the secret sauce right there. If you had to think about, do I get books? Do I get labs? Do I get videos? Whatever you use all comes back to the objectives that are listed on here. So if you're using third-party materials and those third-party materials are referencing topics that aren't in these objectives, then you're using the wrong materials. Stick to the objectives and you're going to do great on this exam. There's plenty to know. We're only halfway through. I'm just going to keep arrowing through the exam objectives. They are huge in being able to work through them. So make sure you know everything that's listed there. It's incredibly important. You can find a copy of those on the CompTIA website or simply use professormesser.com/objectives. Very important. So that's why I think if you're in the case where you are working through the exam and you're trying to figure out the best way to approach, how do I learn this content? That's the way you do it, is you go to the exam objectives. And since they're free, why wouldn't you? That just makes perfect sense to me. And it's incredibly important if you're planning to take that exam. People ask me all the time, how do I know when I'm ready to take my exam? Well, you grab the exam objectives, and if you can explain every bullet to either yourself or to a third party, then you're ready to take the exam. That's exactly the way it works. So see how you like that over in the objectives. Make sure you get your copy of them. They're incredibly important. Very, very useful. So be familiar with those objectives. Make sure you pick up a copy. Now, for those of you that were with us last week in our study group, I, of course, tell you at the end of the study group that we have study groups every month. And of course, here at the end of the study group, I'll tell you when the next one's going to be. And as we sit here, I can tell you that my next Network Plus study group is April the 13th. Now, wait a second. If you were here last week, I told you that it was actually April the 12th. It was a green circle around the 12. This slide looked a little bit different. That was changed soon after. I was told, no, we have craziness going on the 12th. That's not going to work. Our schedule does not permit. You're going to have to do it some other time. Okay, how about the 13th? Oh, okay, we'll do it on the 13th. So that's when we do. So the next A+ study groups are on the 4th and the 6th of April. We have a Network Plus study group on the 13th and a Security Plus study group on the 19th of April. Now, of course, we have our Security Plus study group also for this month. We have 2 days from now on Thursday. So if you're in the middle of doing Security Plus, stop back by in a couple days. I have all new questions for you, all for the SY0601 Security Plus exam. So it might be something fun to do as well. These dates and times, though, they can change, as we can see. Sometimes the chaos of my life requires that I move some of these things around. So if that happens, I will update the calendar. There's your link on the screen, professormesser.com/calendar. I also have a copy of these dates and times on our Discord. So if you go to our Discord channel, there is an events channel on our Discord server, and it lists out these events as well, and it gives you the time and date in your local time zone. So if you're somewhere else in the world, you're trying to do the math, and we changed all the times this on Sunday, and you just aren't sure when it's going to happen, just go over to our Discord events channel, and you'll know exactly when it's going to be in your local area. That might help as well. Well, we went through an hour of Q&A. Can you believe it already? But there's more. There's an after show. But instead of me asking questions, you're going to ask me questions there in the chat room. So stick around for that in just a couple of minutes. We've also got, of course, our success bundle on our website, professormesser.com/netsuccess. I have discounted vouchers on my website for those of you in the U.S. and Canada. And of course, we have plenty to look at for Network Plus on our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube. And don't forget about our pop quiz questions every week, usually on a Tuesday at professormesser.com/Twitter and professormesser.com/Instagram. Well, thanks for sticking in for this first hour of the study group. Stick around for the next hour where I'll ask questions that come from the chat room. Usually those are quite good, so you're not going to want to miss that. Thanks for being here, and we will see you next time on the Network Plus study group. Okay. The secret word was cloud sight. Cloud sight was the secret word. For those of you wondering, I don't mind doing that. So it's time for the after show, everybody. Let's get things set up on my side so I can see the chat room on my screen. That involves me moving a few things around here and making sure I get the battle station set up for the appropriate view of the chat room. In this after show, I like to take questions from you. So if you are on my website at professormesser.com/live, there is, of course, a chat that's right there on the screen. That is an embedded version of the YouTube chat. So if you're on YouTube right now, you'll notice there's a chat next to it. That's the one I'm looking at. So it's the same chat no matter where you happen to be. There's only one chat. I don't currently chat over on the Discord side. It's just so much easier to integrate it over on the YouTube side. And of course, the chat is included with the replay of this, which makes it even better. That way, people who come in afterwards, they want to watch the replay, you can get some of the camaraderie and the Q&A and the conversations that are going back and forth. I want to say behind my back, but actually it's in front of my back as the chat was going on back and forth. So a lot there to work through. Hopefully that's given you some perspective into things you can do. So for this next hour, I'll just take whatever question you happen to have. You can go to the chat, type in whatever question you have. It can be about Network Plus, it can be about certifications, it can be about IT, or it can be about anything. I may not necessarily answer any question you put there, but I'll certainly see the questions. And if it's something that's I can put my input in, I'll be glad to do so. So certainly we can work through those. So let's talk first about something that's really Network Plus related, and it sort of fits into one of the previous questions that we had earlier. This is from Kadoosh314. It's Pi Day, isn't it? Kadoosh says, link aggregation versus NIC teaming, two very different technologies. Now, are there any comparisons in how they operate or function? Let's look at this. So you've got NIC. They are very similar in the things that they are doing. Link aggregation is very commonly used to connect switches together because there's so many interfaces on switches. You can run a lot of different cables between switches. Usually they also support very high speeds between those. So it's usually, you can imagine, the data going between switches is usually a lot more data than there might be from a single device. But that's not always true. Sometimes you have devices that you would like to increase their capacity. You want to increase the amount of bandwidth that they can support simultaneously. So link aggregation is certainly supported on end devices as well, although it's certainly much less prevalent because usually your end devices have a single Ethernet interface. Usually you will see multiple interfaces on servers. Or a good example that I like to use, because I have link aggregation on a device that's in my data center, which is a closet that's right over here. My data center has a NAS, a Synology NAS. It has 4 gigabit Ethernet connections on the back, because I haven't upgraded to 10 gig yet on that box, but it has 4 connections. I can take all 4 of those, put them on my switch, set up link aggregation on my NAS, and now instead of having 1 gigabit input and output to the NAS, now I have 4 gigabits input and output to the NAS. So there's some benefit there. And it sort of leads you down the road of, okay, well, if that's the link aggregation part of it, what about NIC teaming? Well, think of NIC teaming as being an aggregation, but it's something that's happening inside that single device. So that NIC teaming that's there might have connections out to multiple switches, and the single device determines where it's receiving and sending data from. The switches on the other end of that have no idea that you've enabled NIC teaming. It's really more to provide redundancy of the network interface cards on that server, so that if we lose a network interface card, the server is still up and running and available, but they still operate at the same time. So there is a little bit of a comparison there. You're absolutely correct, Kadoosh. It does have a little bit of comparison between the two. They are functionally quite different in how they're implemented, and very functionally quite different in how you would set up the cabling. I do have images of both of those scenarios in that video, so that you can really work through, what does this look like? How would somebody design a network with link aggregation? And then how would somebody design a network with the port teaming or the NIC teaming on a server? So that you can really see functionally the difference between those two. And it should be relatively easy when you look at the diagram. Okay, if you lose this device, you've lost the network. But if you lose this device, you're still up and running for all of those. So a good question, because there are differences. The differences do have nuance. There is slight differences between them, but they are used definitely in different scenarios, especially depending on what you're trying to provide redundancy for. And connectivity to a server, NIC teaming is a good one. Connectivity between switches and bandwidth usage between switches, definitely link aggregation. Link aggregation certainly lends itself when somebody needs more bandwidth. NIC teaming can be used to increase bandwidth, but it commonly is implemented to provide redundancy of the network interface cards as well. So different scenarios. Obviously, link aggregation has that too. If you set up 4 links in link aggregation and one fails, it will still use the other 3 links. There's some redundancy there. Again, it's that nuance, and the nuances on Network Plus are incredibly important. Make sure you have a look at those diagrams and see what those differences are. Let's do some other questions that have come through. I've got more in this list. This is a common question, and one that is sort of different depending on what your interests are. This is from Nelson, who says, what sort of home lab projects should I work on to gain a little real-world experience for security and network basics? There's a number of different things you can do, and I mentioned some of these in a video I created called How to Get a Job in IT with No Experience. It is in the YouTube video description of this video. That video, it's a 30-minute video, and I realize that's like a lifetime on YouTube. But that 30 minutes I put in, like all of my videos, is just chock full of information. There's no slack in this video. It's just one constant idea and thought after another. I try to put as much density into these videos as possible. And so this is another good one, because I always tell people, if you're going to walk into an interview to try to get a job, what do you talk about? How do you describe what you've done in IT if you haven't done anything in IT? Well, you build your own IT. You become your own IT department for your own network and your own home lab. And that's one of the best things you can do. Not just to say, I've done it. Like, let's take this example. What home lab project should I work on to gain a little real world experience for security and network basics? So a good example I use in that video is, let's set up a firewall. Let's set up pfSense. pfSense is a commonly used open source firewall. A firewall that's commonly used for people that like open source anyway. pfSense, though, is a very capable firewall. It gives you the feel of, well, not just the feel, but it provides you with a way to test and implement firewall rules. You can build out your rule set. You can implement other technologies into it. So once you have your pfSense firewall running, now let's add Snort onto the top of it. Snort, an odd name, but it is an open source intrusion detection and intrusion prevention tool. So imagine having your firewall and your IPS all in the same device, integrated with each other to some degree, and being able to set up firewall rules, being able to set up IPS rules, being able to build out and create your own rules and definitions, and be able to allow or block traffic that might be going through. Those can be really interesting, especially if someone is trying to show someone that they have worked with these technologies. So I often tell people, yes, you should set up a firewall. You should absolutely set up something that you can use to prove that you've worked with these technologies. But more importantly, when you set these up, things aren't going to work right. You're going to make mistakes in how you implement a firewall rule. You're going to turn on a firewall rule that ends up blocking all of your traffic, and all you wanted to do was block one thing, except the firewall traffic that you blocked was also your configuration of the firewall. You effectively just locked yourself out of your own firewall. This happens all the time. Hopefully, this happens to you. And I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but what I'm trying to get across to you is if you can document all the problems you ran into during the implementation of these technologies, you can explain to someone, oh, I got a great story for you. I installed pfSense in my home lab. That's that open source firewall. You know about a pfSense, right? Okay. So pfSense, great firewall, but I set up a rule that I thought would be blocking this thing. It blocked me out of the firewall. I locked myself out of it. Can you believe that? What an idiot I am. But I found a way around it, and here's what I did. And you can explain to them the process you went through to work around the problem that you created for yourself, or to work around a problem that you found when you were implementing it. Maybe you didn't do this to yourself, but you describing to the person interviewing you a problem you ran into, the thought process you had to resolve the problem, and then what you did to get it back up and running again. That's like a 5 to 10 minute conversation, really more of a soliloquy. They're not even talking to you at that point, which, by the way, is exactly what you want in an interview. The more you're talking, the better off this interview is going to go for you, because they're going to want to listen to all of these things you're saying. Nobody giving an interview wants to be the one talking the whole time. They want to hear the things you've done. They want to hear you prove that you could do this for the job. And you should probably wrap it into this, that I did all of that. And then when I saw your job posting for a network engineer who was well-versed in the process of troubleshooting, I thought this would be a great story to tell you, to explain how I would fit best for this particular position. Should always come back around to why this is always the best position for you, and why haven't you hired me already? So those are the things I think about. I'd also recommend you get a copy of, and maybe this is something goes a little bit further beyond just an open source firewall, but maybe you want to grab a copy of Packet Tracer. Packet Tracer is it's a free to use application from Cisco that emulates a networking environment and Cisco devices, along with workstations, laptops, and other things you can put on a screen. It's a virtual world that you can effectively drag and drop to build your corporate network. You want a router? Drag and drop and stick a router there. You need a switch? Drag, drop a switch. You need multiple switches? You want some workstations? You want to send traffic to each other in this virtual world? You can do that. You can capture the packets. You can watch it. You can bullet frame it, bullet time it, so that every frame you can watch as it goes through each hop along the way, and you can stop it and say, okay, go to the next one. So instead of watching all this traffic go back and forth so quickly you don't know what's going on, you can freeze time and do one hop at a time to really examine, how does traffic get from this device to that device? What is it doing? And when it hits these different routers and switches, it is a free to use tool. I mentioned that earlier, but it does require that you register with Cisco and that you have a username and password with Cisco. But all of those things cost nothing to you. There's no cost to be able to register. There's no cost to use Packet Tracer. It is a little bit of a learning curve because it requires you to have some knowledge of the Cisco setup for switches and routers. So it does go well beyond the scope of Network Plus, But I'm thinking if you're getting into Network Plus, that you're probably going to be getting into switches and routers, some of you at least, switches and routers later on. So I would recommend that as well. Have a look at the different options available for Packet Tracer. Try some of those other tools. And if pfSense doesn't work for you, install the Apache web server. Install WordPress, an Apache web server, and MySQL, and get a WordPress implementation up and running. That has just as many important things that you need to know about, because it deals with you configuring things on a firewall. You're now familiar with MySQL. You've talked about your experience with relational databases. You can talk about the implementation of WordPress, which is a web-based content management system. You can talk about installing and implementing Apache Web Server, which is complex enough by itself to have plenty of problems that you're going to run into. All of these things are really good. So I know I've kind of talked over that one a number of times, but that's what I would recommend, is a little bit across all of those things can really make the difference in you first understanding the technology that you're working on, and secondly, telling someone else the experiences that you've had with that technology. That becomes pretty important when you're in an interview environment. And as I've interviewed, I've been a hiring manager. I've had my stack of resumes in a big folder that I would collect, both online and physically. I would have people come in. We'd have interviews. We'd have conversations. It's sometimes difficult to find the right person. You have to prepare almost as much for the interview process as you prepare for the technical knowledge you need to be able to talk for the interview process. So that's my recommendation. Maybe that'll help you as you go through your studies. Other questions that I have in the chat room, I've got some others that are in this list. So this is kind of a common question that I do run into, and it's one that I don't have an answer to. Let's see the question I don't have an answer to. Is from Duncan9 TV, who says, my road to cybersecurity is help desk, then sysadmin, then network engineer, then cybersecurity analyst. Is this a good road? If that is the road that gets you to where you want to be, then it's absolutely the right road. There is no rail that you're stuck to in IT. Not everyone is required to follow the same path to get to that final implementation of what they were shooting for. In fact, that often changes as time goes on. In my particular scenario, I was field service technician, help desk technician, then server administrator, then network administrator, then finally got into protocol analysis and protocol analysis and network management, and then that allowed me to move very easily into IT security. So the cybersecurity side was a perfect place to sort of end up things working for a third party. And then I thought, how can I take all of this knowledge, bring it back, and apply it in a way that could help people do a similar thing? That's why we're here today. So that path that you've set up, that's almost identical to the path I took. That's a perfectly reasonable way to get from point A to point B. And I think that's one very good way to do it, but it's not the only way. And one of the challenges we have today is we don't have the ability to read into the future. We don't know what happens next. We don't know what new technology shows up. We don't know what new website suddenly becomes the most popular. We don't know what cloud-based technologies will do next. We sort of have an idea, and we're sort of watching, and it's kind of turning a boat, turning a big ship. It takes a little bit of time to kind of see where those technologies end up. But if you're watching where the boats are going and you're talking to people who are in the next to the captain watching him turn the boat, you can get an idea of what the more newer and more interesting technologies are that are coming down the line. So you'll want to do that. Check with the big industry leaders. You know, a lot of people in this industry go to Gartner. They are an analyst firm. I say all Gartner does, but Gartner is a company that looks at what manufacturers and people creating software are doing. It looks at what customers need, and it tries to figure out how are those two things going to come together, and where do we see the industry going over the next 12 months. Gartner always puts out a a view of technology, the emerging trends in technology. They do that once a year, and it's usually pretty spot on. They got a lot of smart people over at Gartner, but they're not the only analyst firm. There's lots of great analyst firms out there, but those would be good ones to look at to try to figure out where's the industry going. Instead of doing help desk sysadmin network engineer, what if I did help desk sysadmin network engineer, cloud engineer, and then cybersecurity SE? You know, there's different ways to get to where you need to go. And as the technologies move around and as they change and become more popular, you may find it more lucrative to go one direction than another, or more flexible to go one direction or another. You'll just have to see what's available in your particular area. That's one good thing about this industry is there's more than one way to get to that final path. You just find the way that's best for you. And it depends on, do you like to travel? Do you not like to travel? Do you need to make a lot of money? Do you not really care so much about the money? Would you like more flexibility in your hours than getting paid a lot of money? You have a lot of different things that you could do, and you can live wherever you'd like to live. That's one of the nice things about IT. You know, there's jobs for IT everywhere. So figure out what makes sense for you and go make that happen. I think that's the best way to approach doing this. Mark has another good question that I get all the time in my email, which is, I am getting into IT. I previously worked in this other industry. I'm moving into IT, but I'm 30 years old. I'm 40 years old. I'm 50 years old. I'm 58 years old. You know, is this the right thing I should be doing? Well, of course, the technology doesn't know how old you are. So that's one of the great things, is that if you know the material, you know the content, you know how these devices work, you know how to administer them, doesn't matter what your age is. So that part's great. IT does not have to worry about the people not being able to lift heavy items. It doesn't have to worry about how old you are and set up limitations on who can get into the industry based on their age. Unfortunately, humans do that for us. That's one of the challenges that we have seen in the industry, is that if you are stepping into one of your first entry-level roles in IT, it's probably going to be in a help desk, a service desk, or something at one of those entry-level positions. It's where we tend to start in this industry. And you're usually competing against people that are probably going to be younger than you if you're 38 years old. So this might be a very good opportunity to take advantage of your wisdom. And that's one of the benefits you have when you're 38 versus being 22, is that you have a lot of years behind you, and you have a lot of relationships and people that you have made through the years. So now's the time to say, I want to make the change. I need to get into this role. I need to ramp up very quickly. I'll take an entry-level position, but I'm 6 months into that. I'm moving to the next thing. We're going to ramp this very quickly, which I think is also very important when you step into the industry at an age over 22. And 38 certainly qualifies for that. But you've already been in an industry. Let's say that, Mark, I know nothing about you, Mark, but let's say you were working in healthcare, or you were working in transportation, or you were working in manufacturing. You know people in those particular areas who have worked in manufacturing or who have healthcare that they work on. Those are great people to go to say, what do the IT people in your organization need? I'm very familiar with healthcare. I've been in healthcare my entire career. People who are in IT would love to have someone knowledgeable from the business side of things, but the organizational side of things, because sometimes there is a gap there between how to set up Active Directory versus why are we setting up Active Directory? What are we doing with Active Directory? And you have to hook those things together. Setting up and using technology for technology's sake never ends well. There has to be a reason we're putting this technology in, but we're spending all of our time learning about ports and protocols and connector types that we almost forget that, oh yeah, we're in healthcare. Our job is to make sure that we can get people well and get them out of the hospital. So there's a connection that we have to make as technologists so that we understand when we build these databases out why we're doing it. If you've already worked on the other side, outside of IT, you've been in healthcare, then you already know about that. You know the struggles that people have using these systems on a nursing floor. You understand the struggles of bandwidth when people are trying to transfer MRI images from one device to another, or even just view them on a device. That's really valuable information, whether it's working at the same company you're at now or with one that's very similar. So don't be afraid to leverage your industry knowledge that you've created or you've built through the years, because that can be very valuable as well. And the more people you know, those are the ones that can really help you when you're getting, especially when you're moving in the middle of your career to a different type like IT. You're moving from healthcare to IT. That's a big change. You're going to need some people helping you along the way. And you've already built these relationships. Reach out to them. Hopefully they're on LinkedIn. You could say, hey, I'm looking for a position, an entry-level position. Do you know anybody who's offering those? Is there someone you would recommend me talk to? There's going to be people with ideas. So do that as well. Ageism is a real thing. I've gotten a number of emails of people that have been in situations where they really feel that their age was a disadvantage going in the door. So you have to prepare for that. And having those relationships with third parties gets you past a number of those worries, because those people know you. They know you're a hard worker. They know you're a smart person. They know you do great at this job. They can really be the ones to root for you and tell people in the industry, oh no, you need to hire this person right now. He's going to crush it. And in a year, he's going to be managing our network or managing our servers. He's just going to go skyrocket through this stuff. That's what I would recommend. Get somebody in your corner who's going to be your cheerleader, who's going to tell people, no, that's exactly what you want to do. And that kind of wipes away some of the worry you have with ageism in the industry. So absolutely use those. I tell people all the time, you should have a LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn already, you got to have one. People tell me I don't like getting on social media. I don't like putting myself out there. But LinkedIn is more... although you would wonder sometimes when you log into LinkedIn, but LinkedIn really is a more professional network. Yes, there's a lot of people rah-rah and look at me, but that's humans. You're going to have that online regardless. You get that offline. You don't need LinkedIn to have people act that way. You just need to be in front of them. So LinkedIn is a great way to keep up with people you work with. Make sure you focus on it being professional and that you're linking to people that you've worked with professionally, that you don't put people on your LinkedIn who are just people that are in your circle of friends. You want this to be a professional network so that when you post things about, hey, I just set up a home lab and I ran into this problem, I wanted to document it so that you could see, well, employers can see that too. And they're like, oh, this person's already set up pfSense. They've already done these things. They've already run into these problems. They seem to be able to write pretty well. They've posted things online. They communicate well. Let's get them in. We should talk to them about this particular position. So although LinkedIn is not a panacea, it's not in everything to everyone. It doesn't fix all of the problems we have with hiring. It gets us to a point where we can at least share our knowledge with other people in the industry who are very familiar with these technologies and who are willing and interested in reading through it. So that's what I would recommend too. Hopefully that can help you. I know that's a lot. I go through a lot with these after show questions, but I think it's just an important thing. And in fact, people in the chat room are saying, yeah, I'm not a big fan of LinkedIn. I get it. I understand. And I can appreciate that, but it is really the best thing, kind of the only thing we've got going right now from a professional level. So I really, really highly recommend doing that. That might be something if you're ever in the case where you're trying to find people who are looking for jobs, people who have the jobs, it's a great place to sync all of that up and to toot your own horn a little bit. There's certainly a lot of that on LinkedIn. Join the club. If you aren't showing people what you know, they're never going to know it. And LinkedIn's a great way to tout some of these things that you know. So I recommend doing that as well. Other questions. Let's keep going here with the other questions that we have. This should be pretty good. I've got lots that people are typing in, so I'm kind of scrolling through. And of course, I talk so much that I lose track of just how much is coming through here. So bear with me a moment, and I will go through all of these, and we'll sort of find out what the different options are. So other pieces, other things that we have on this list. there's tons of people. Thank you, by the way, for being here and being able to work through the after show questions and put these in here. It's just phenomenal what we're seeing here. Other questions that came up. Well, sure. This is not a bad question. Hey, can I send you a letter? Pick me a letter. Hey, Vanna. You could send me, I guess you could send me a letter. There is a corporate address for people that want to send physical things. First, please don't. But secondly, I do have a physical address for the studio, which is not my home. It's a mailbox. It's a Dropbox. So that is absolutely, it's on my contact list on the website, professormesser.com/contact us. Click the contact us link. It's in that list for the contact us. You could send a letter. Just send me an email, though. If you have a question, you have something you want to go through, just send me an email. I'm not like, if you watch other YouTubers, I don't really call myself a YouTuber, but that's where we have all of our videos. So I guess by default, that's what I am, who will pick up things at their Dropbox. But I do the same thing they do, is I go through everything that's there. Even if I get a package, I go through the entire package. I make sure that everything in that package is legitimate. There's no air tags in there, anything weird. And then that goes back to the studio. So I do check everything out before I leave my mailbox. Just for some of you, I know you people. I know some of you people. I don't think that's what this question is about, but I just wanted to put that out there, that I do read through all of those things and make sure there's nothing unusual in our mail. The internet's weird, people. I don't know what to tell you. The stories I've got, there's some weird stuff going on. Most of you are pretty awesome, though, so thank you. I appreciate that. Here's some practical knowledge for those of you. Back to that question about age and IT. Justin says, I didn't get a job in IT until I was 35. I've nerded forever. Solidarity, my brother. But didn't get a job in IT until later in life. Mostly because I felt I wasn't qualified because of no college and certs. And that's what's kind of nice about IT to some degree, is that it is a career based on your personal knowledge of how to do these things. In fact, I've mentioned on other study groups, there's not a lot of places you can go and get a college degree in information technology, and not a real information technology degree. We've done this before. We've simply gone out to random universities to see what they could offer. And you'll find a lot of the four-year universities, a lot of the state universities, and a lot of private universities have great computer science degrees. That's not IT. They have degrees on technology that talk about building your own hardware and building and writing your own firmware. Again, not IT. And they have no classes on how to set up Windows, how to get a Windows server running, how to get a Microsoft SQL server running, how to get MySQL running, how to get a web server running, how to maintain the data, how to keep the data safe, how to set up an IPsec tunnel, how to set up firewalls, how to set up redundant firewalls, how to enable link aggregation, how to configure VLAN, all the things we talk about in these certifications. It's really hard to find a degree at a four-year university that covers these topics. But of course, that's what employers would like you to know. Okay, it's great that you're able to communicate, fine. So you took an English course. You learned how to write a business letter, or in a way that you can communicate with people in email in a business environment. But ultimately, you're going to need how to know how to use this technology, how to implement the technology, how to support it, and how to secure it. And unfortunately, the vast majority of four-year universities have nothing along those lines, nor are they interested in building any. They don't feel like information technology is worth their time. And so what we have found is a lot of private organizations, a lot of private universities and private training organizations have come up with their own 2- and 4-year degrees in information technology to fill that gap. And that's what employers want, but it doesn't require you to have this. I worked with some amazing technologists throughout my career that had no college degree. And anytime I had a technical question, that's who I called. Hey, have you seen this? Have you heard about this? Oh yeah, I saw that. Here's what I think you should do. And they were right. I mean, they're just spot on every time. So not going to college doesn't mean that you can't work in IT. In fact, may not even have any correlation to that. My degree is in business management. Has nothing to do with IT. There was no operating systems knowledge or networking knowledge or IT security knowledge that I got out of my 4-year management degree from a state university. I mean, it was nice to have a degree that I could say for the employers who like to check the box of, yes, they have a degree, at least I could check the box. Did that degree have anything to do with the job that I was applying for? No, did not. Therein lies the irony of our hiring system in the United States and elsewhere. It's just sort of the way it operates. So first, Justin, thank you for that feedback. I can tell you all day what I've seen and what I've heard, but until you hear from somebody who's actually done it, what do I know? I'm just that guy from down the street. Justin has that right there, so you can understand more about what other people go through when they get through these things. But we both agree, both Justin and myself, go get in it. Go figure out a way to make that happen. Follow the path. You know, one of the things that's a little different is once you are a little bit older, a little bit more mature, you've kind of been through life a little bit. Life's kind of hit you sometimes. You've had to work through things. You do get a perspective, and I think you may have a different idea of how to get into IT and what you plan to do. Might be a little different than somebody who hasn't been through a lot of those worldly situations. So it's interesting what time and maturity and life does to someone's motivation. So I totally get it. And that's why I tell people, don't worry about the age. We'll work through the age part, learn the technology, link up with a core group of people you know who can help you through these phases, and you're going to be just fine. The computers have no idea how old you are. Thankfully. I'm so glad, computers, that none of you, maybe one of my computers, the laptop apparently knows how old I am because it just turns off in the middle of everything. But everything else is working great. And it doesn't care. As long as I type the right things in my keyboard, we're in really good shape. So that's why I kind of work through the idea of age, and I just dismiss it and say, go do it, because I think that's the important part. Wow. I do want to talk about this one. This is from Devin, a $50 super chat. Devin, thank you so much. Devin says, just saw you were live. I am live. Want to express my gratitude for you being an invaluable resource towards obtaining my A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, and the promotions, pay raises, and bonuses that came with it. Thank you, Devin. First, congratulations on all of your certifications, on all of the promotions, the pay raises, the bonuses. These are things, again, that I say when I'm live, that it's out there. And all you have to do is apply yourself, get these certifications, learn about the technologies, go get the jobs, go get the better jobs, and you get to decide what you do with where your career is going and what you do in that career. And at the same time, it pays pretty well. So Devin sort of qualifying that the opportunities are out there. The pay is out there. The things you can do in your career are there for you to take. You just need to apply yourself and make that happen. Thank you so much, Devin, also for the $50 super chat. I mentioned that not necessary for any donations, but we do take everything, apply it back into what we're doing here. Keeps the lights on, keeps the live stream going, keeps the motivation going. Lori's happy. I'm happy. Mrs. Professor Messer's happy. We're kind of keeping the whole party going on all of these things that we happen to have there. Devin, congratulations on the things you've done with your certifications and your career. And thanks for sharing that for everyone else as well. The super chat's nice, but I think the information that you're providing to other people is even nicer and much more important. So thank you for doing that. It's nice to get a little qualification there, and let everybody else who's watching, everybody who's listening, there are things that you will be able to do with your career that you never even imagined. Just get in there, apply yourself, just keep moving up those levels, keep leveling up in IT is remarkable where these things will go. So congratulations. And thank you again, Devin. Let's ask this. We kind of touched on this one. And you did correct the misspelling here. So don't jump on Let's Play for this one. He says, Professor, layer 4, speaking of the OSI model, deals only with TCP and UDP, Correct? Question mark? I guess he's asking correct. In the world of IP, of Internet Protocol, Layer 4 is primarily TCP and UDP. You are correct. But there are other protocols in the world. We just don't use very many of them these days. I spoke in a previous study group, I don't know if it was last month or before, that prior to IP really being a popular protocol on corporate networks, what we tended to use was IPX, which is a protocol suite that was created by Novell. And a lot of organizations, prior to Microsoft really taking over the server network operating system market, and with Windows Server, where a lot of people got the same functionality was from a series of server products from Novell called Novell NetWare. So prior to us even knowing what IP was, we were using protocols called IPX and SPX. That SPX protocol being the layer 4, one of the layer 4 protocols used by IPX, and IPX kind of being the layer 3 protocol in that mix. So if you still had Novell NetWare on your network, and this is something we often found we were migrating away from Novell and migrating over to Microsoft, is we would have both IPX and IP on the same network at the same time. And indeed, if you go into Windows, I'm sure there's still a way in Windows to add additional layer 3 protocols, and I'll bet Novell NetWare is in there. I would not recommend installing it because there's no reason to. Probably would not create problems to have it there, but obviously we don't want to create and open up things in your operating system that are unnecessary or run code that would be unnecessary, and IPX certainly would be these days, unless maybe you have an older Novell NetWare device that you happen to be using. So there are other protocols out there that we've used and that had a fit into layer 3 and layer 4. And there's others as well. There's Banyan Vines. There is back in the day of Apple Talk. There used to be, Apple had its own protocol. I guess it still does, Apple Talk. And there were versions of Apple Talk that worked on Ethernet and for Token Ring. For those of you that back in the day used Token Talk. So other protocols have different spots in the layers of the OSI model. It's just that these days, practically 100%, functionally 100% of what we are doing is IP. So generally, the only thing you commonly see at layer 4 is either TCP or UDP, because those are the two layer 4 protocols associated with the Internet Protocol suite of protocols. So there's other things you could put on your network. Who knows what's next? You never know what other protocols are coming down the line. IPv6 obviously has been here for a while. Will there be a different set of protocols doing other things? Probably not at this point. I think pretty much we've all decided one suite of protocols is good. Let's stick with IP, whether IP4 or IPv6. So let's just go with that. And I think that's probably a good idea for most of us. We don't need to complicate things. It was a bit complicated managing multiple protocols at the same time on the network, where we would have to, what we call dual stack. We would have to have multiple, at least 2 different protocol suites running simultaneously on these systems. So that's what I would recommend too. This is more of an inside baseball question, but I say I like to take questions regardless of what it happens to be. Light asks, I know the likes are important to help him out. Thank you. Hit that thumbs up, hit the like button if you really like the video. If you don't like the video, you need to hit the thumbs up button. If you like the video, thumbs up is what you should be hitting. Yeah, you see what I did there? But the views are also going to transfer. Watching on his website, yes, they are. So wherever you watch the video, whether it's embedded on my website, whether it's embedded on another website, whether you're watching directly on YouTube, all counts towards the views. We're fine there. It's not a problem. From my perspective, don't worry about where you are watching the videos or what page or site you happen to be on. Pick the one that's best for you. Some people stay exclusively on YouTube. Some people come to my website because I've got the transcript there and they can step through the index one at a time. But pick whatever you want to do. I always tell you that I have this, that the number of views we get and the number of likes we get is enough to get the interest or at least the attention of YouTube. And I have my own person at YouTube I can send emails to. We often will have Zoom meetings. Well, I guess in this case, Google Meets, where we will talk about the latest things. They'll talk about things coming down the line that nobody's seen yet. I can participate in some of the betas that we're working on, and it's just been phenomenal, which I could not do if it wasn't for your likes and wasn't for your views. So let me first thank all of you for all of the views. Thank you for the likes and the dislikes. Getting constructive feedback is always good, but it's a way that I at least can interact more with the folks that are over on YouTube. So that helps us out quite a bit, and gets us more ideas and things we can do to make this channel better for you to be able to learn. And we've had direct input into YouTube and some of the learning products that they're working on, which has just been great, because I know that when these newer products are rolled out someday, and I'm speaking very broadly because I can't talk about specifics with the things that YouTube is working on, but when these things come to light, you have had an input into that as well. You just don't even know it yet. And that's because you're able to hit the thumbs up. Who knew that just hitting a thumbs up or hitting a like or adding a subscription to the channel would mean so much, but it really does. So thank you. And again, it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't want to leave any super thanks or super chat, that's fine. Just want to watch the videos on YouTube, that's fine. Do whatever makes sense for you. The important thing for me is that whatever you are doing, do whatever you have to do to get the knowledge you need to pass the certification exam, to get a job or to get a better job. That's all I need out of this. I really feel that if we are working towards that final goal, that everything else will just take care of itself. So I'm trying not to wag the dog too much. I really think that if we keep the eye on making sure that we have intelligent, trained, well-established people in information technology, that everything else should take care of itself as far as this crazy experiment goes. So don't worry about the details. I'll worry about the details. You just do what you need to do to get that certification, get that job, and everything else will take care of it. Other questions. Let's keep it going. Other ones. So other things here. Well, Jeff says, speaking of, this is just great feedback, by the way. Thank you folks in the chat room are just phenomenal. Jeff writes, got into IT at 40, more than 39, less than 41. No degree, Jeff says. Have A+. The job didn't care. They were more interested in my previous customer service experience. Now that I'm hired, they're paying for additional certs. That's the way you do it right there. This is perhaps the thing that we don't talk about enough. It's obviously part of A+, but we really sort of miss it because of all these trees that are in our forest of technology, is that most employers would like you to be technically knowledgeable, but perhaps even more is they'd like you to be personable. They'd like you to be able to interact with others. This is not always the easiest thing. People will sometimes have to really work at this. I especially come from the world of, I have to learn how to talk to people. You know, my job started off with me just driving to a site and interacting with one person. Hi, I'm here because you had a problem with a cable. I brought a replacement. Here's my replacement cable. You want me to plug it in? Okay, plugged it in. I'm off to the next thing. That's what I did every day. And it was very simple. You knew what you were doing. You knew where you were going. You met with a person. You said, hi, I'm here to fix your thing. They love to see you because you're fixing whatever's broken. Oh, yes, please come in. Okay, we fixed the thing. Here, sign here. I'm off to the next thing. That was great. But I also realized that in this industry, the more you're able to interact with others and really communicate with them at more of a human level, then you go much further in this industry. And eventually, my jobs took me into communicating with a room full of people around a conference table, and then ultimately into a room full of 1,000 people at a trade show, where you are up on the big stage and there's just 500 people, 1,000 people in the room, and they go, okay, here's your microphone and here's your laser pointer, go. Okay, you have to kind of learn the way that works. Now, some of that was formal training that I took. My company sent me off to a company that does nothing but train people on how to speak in front of others. And then of course, you learn things sometimes the hard way. When things don't go well, you learn from your mistakes and you sort of tweak that as you go. I mean, if you go back and look at early videos I did on YouTube, they would probably make me cringe pretty well. But now we've got kind of a system and a style and a format, and it just becomes comfortable over time. Nothing is fantastic first time out of the gate. You have to work on these things and you develop them over time. So I love this story, Jeff, about no A+, no formal degree, but you could talk to people and you could say, oh, you're having a problem? Tell me what's going on. Oh, that's not good at all. Let's see what we can do to get that resolved. And then you're having this partnership with someone who's having an issue with the help desk, rather than having a conflict when somebody calls and they're yelling, this isn't working. My printer won't print. If this printer doesn't get fixed today, I'm going to, and you say, I hate that. Boy, these printers, they will drive you crazy. But I've got these things on here that I do, and it tends to fix 99% of these. Let's step through these 4 things, and I bet you we can get this running. You know, having that ability not to personally take everything somebody is telling you and internalizing it, but instead recognizing frustration and saying, I'm with you. Yeah, that's the worst. But I have some ideas on how we can fix this. Do you think we could do that together? And bring someone in to say, let's fix it together and make this thing work. Sometimes that's all you need. It's interesting that this employer you're with said, we're going to use your customer service skills to make that happen. That's what a great story too. And now that you're in there doing your customer service thing, now they want to get you technically smarter. That's one of the things I think that's important, is it's almost easier to teach somebody port numbers and subnetting than it is how to talk to someone. So if you can already talk to somebody, then you can have a great interview, you can get the job, and then they can teach you the other things you need to know, which is also pretty nice. Other question, let's see. Let's keep going through these that we have. Other things. So this is really kind of hits me right there. And the things that are going on is that Dark says, I've been doing telecom/networking for the past 30 years. Love the networking side of things. And working on getting my 2 kids into the field. As many of you know, I've got 3 kids, all of them in a technical or IT related, either they've already earned a degree in IT or they're working towards them. And so Dark says, so that's why I'm going for these certs, starting with the A+. Yes, if they're going through that process of understanding and learning about the A+, it'd be nice if I could keep up with them as well. And that's one of the things I have. One of my sons got a degree in cloud technologies. So of course, at the beginning of his class, I was talking to him about protocols and doing Wireshark and understanding he goes, oh yeah, Dad, we already set that up. I installed that and set it up as a container, and we had it running here, and then we put it on the cloud server, and then we captured the traffic going between there and the data. He was just already ahead of me. I got that, Dad. I got that. We're already way past that, old man. We're already doing cool stuff in the cloud. So don't talk to me about your TCP and UDP thing, which was great. I'm perfectly fine being the foil in that conversation, because that really helps in a number of different ways. First, I know they're getting a good training, a good knowledge, a good experience with the things they're learning. But we could also communicate about those things. We'd have a conversation about them, which is always fun, and something that that's kind of nice to do with a family, sitting around the coffee table, sitting around the breakfast table or the dinner table, and they are telling you about these things. You're having interesting conversations about those. So we'll have to see where that takes us. So far, they think I'm okay. They think I'm not a bad person. They think I'm an okay dad. So I'm winning along those lines. At least that's what I think's happening. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to find out. Keeping this going. What's in the news? Well, SVB is in the news. This is the Silicon Valley Bank that since we are technical in the things that we are doing, and a lot of the employers that we work through are definitely in the Valley in California, this definitely had some type of effect. And we're going to be still feeling this in other banks as well. Silicon Valley Bank, for those not familiar here in the U.S., made some investments that did not fare very well once interest rates started going up in the U.S. Once inflation went up and interest rates went up, they realized they made very bad investments in government bonds and ultimately realized we aren't going to make enough money to be able to pay for all the things we have to pay for to keep this bank up and running. That caused significant problems with startups, obviously, because startups kept a lot of money in Silicon Valley Bank, but SVB was also used by some of the biggest companies in the Valley, along with, since they are in California and near the area, a lot of the wineries in California. So this single bank that most people, I think of as the technologist bank, also have had an effect on other industries in the state of California as well. Is it more layoffs? Now, SVB, obviously, the government has at least come out this week and said, for better or worse, the government has said your deposits are safe, even if they exceeded the $250,000 deposit level that is insured by our federal government. In the United States, the federal government insurance, the FDIC, handles our insurance for deposits on these banks. And obviously, when you're dealing with the money for a startup or really any company, although it seems like $250,000 is a lot, when you're a business, it's not a lot of money. So that's why the government at least said, don't worry, we'll cover you. Now, we can have an argument, and there will be many, and we never get into politics in this particular area of the internet. We're all about technology. So there will be many conversations you can have on another website about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. What the important part is, though, is that it's not going to be a devastating impact, but it will have a dramatic impact. And by the way, we've already seen SVB is not the only bank that made the same type of investment strategy. We've already seen other banks already show up and go, yeah, we're having problems too because of this. So that's what happens sometimes when the approach to investments and the approach to where this money is coming from, and banks themselves are kind of it's problematic in things that they do along those lines. But this was very problematic up to the point that it completely annihilated one of the strongest and most well-known banks in that particular area. And as we've already seen, it's had an effect on even some of us. If you're somebody who is on Etsy, for example, Etsy is a website where people can create their own physical materials like t-shirts and hats and other crafts they can put on Etsy, and people can buy those crafts, kind of like a big craft store or craft meetup, except it's online. And it's a fantastic site. And people who are working, you can work at home, put your goods out on Etsy. You have your own storefront there, and you can run your own business using Etsy. Well, guess what bank Etsy used to pay these people from? Silicon Valley Bank, at least to some degree. So there are people on Etsy that are now wondering, am I going to get paid my sales money this month? Are we going to continue to be up and running? Are these sites still going to be there? Well, it looks like they are. It looks like they will be able to get their money. May not be in a month, but it looks like at least the government's kind of stepping in at this point to figure that out. So that's one we're all going to have to watch, because it could have an impact on what companies are still around a month from now, 6 months from now, or a year from now. We'll have to find out and see what comes of that bank, and then what the fallout with other banks happens to be as well. That story is still going on and will probably continue to go on for quite some time. Other questions. I did mention Packet Tracer earlier, but for those of you that just want to go a little bit beyond the scope of Network Plus, and you're thinking, this switching stuff is interesting. I love the routing tables. I love the idea of configuring a router, setting up multiple routers, maybe with dynamic routing protocols, setting up a switch so you've got spanning tree and you can connect devices to it, and you can ping through the network and you can send data and you can watch it all happen. Well, that's what Packet Tracer does. So I really think it's a good beyond the scope of Network Plus technology to have on your system. For the purposes of Network Plus, you don't need Packet Tracer. So what you're going to know is what's in the exam objectives. But if you're planning your next step to be in the Cisco world, well, you might as well jump in there now and see what you can do. It is quite fun. There's some great labs for Packet Tracer and videos for Packet Tracer on the internet. So go look at them, go watch them. There's a very significant ramp on that particular application. It takes a while to figure out what you're looking at and what's going on. There's a lot of buttons and there's a lot of capabilities and there's a lot of things you can do. So it does take a little bit of time to learn. But once you figure out the basics, pretty nice. You could set up a network and start testing things between switches and routers in 5 minutes. You can build an enterprise network in 5 minutes and start sending data through it to see how making a change might affect the data flow through that network. What else you can't do that with real equipment. That's why I tell people that want to buy real Cisco equipment for training, I say, before you do that, have you tried the free equipment, which is online and virtual? That's certainly much easier to set up than physical, certainly much easier to manage than physical switches and routers, and costs a lot less. So do that first. And then if you really feel like you need to have the plugging in of an Ethernet cable and unplugging of an Ethernet cable, you can go buy real equipment. But that's a lot of money to spend just to have the feel for plugging in a physical cable. And in reality, by the way, if you're getting into switching and routing, you're going to be a network administrator, you're going to be a switch administrator, you're going to be a router administrator, you're never touching your equipment once you install it anyway. You're sitting at your desk in your SSH or using other front ends to that equipment. You're never going to touch that equipment again. You might not even have access to the equipment. You may be administratively prevented from touching that equipment again. Not unusual, just kind of normal to be able to have that capability. And it's free. Why wouldn't you use it? I think it's a great idea. Go get it. And if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But it's a great tool with a lot of really cool features in it. I like it a lot. I've got it installed on my computer right now. So if that tells you right, maybe that gives you the idea of getting in there. Other questions. Other questions. I'm just going to keep scrolling. Oh, this is pretty good question. So if someone's talking Packet Tracer, which we just did, which are 2 words, Packet Tracer, I guess you could probably Google and find it in either case. There's other options you'll probably see out there about GNS3. GNS3 is a similar virtual environment that allows you to set up switches and routers and other equipment, connect them together virtually, and kind of build the network on your screen. But it's not a emulator. It's more of a virtualized environment because it takes the actual code that you would have on a Cisco switch. You take that code off of a switch, you put it onto GNS3, and it runs the code as if it is a Cisco switch. So Packet Tracer, you might run into scenarios where certain commands are not available in Packet Tracer because Packet Tracer is simply emulating the functionality of that switch or router. I mean, it's a close emulation. You would almost not know there's any difference if you were at the command line until you try to run a certain command and it says, I don't know that command. Like, wait, that command's in that switch or router. Well, that's because it's not the actual switch or router code. GNS3 is. But therein lies your problem. If you have to run the actual code to run GNS3, then you need to be licensed to use that code. Same as any operating system. You can't run Windows unless you have a license to run Windows. You can't run Mac OS unless you have a license to run Mac OS. You can't run Cisco code unless you have a license to run Cisco code. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. I want to run GNS3, but I don't have the code. Well, then you can't run GNS3. So that's why Packet Tracer, I think, is a much better place to start. I would also say GNS3, not the easiest thing to get up and running. Eventually, you'll get it, but it's not the easiest thing to run. I don't think GNS3 is a good recommendation for somebody starting out. I think mostly because it requires access to the code, which you don't have, unless you already have a switch. But if you already have a switch, why are you using GNS3? There's another chicken and egg problem. So that's why I tell people, yes, there's other things you can run. In fact, even Cisco has other applications that you can purchase from them to be able to run more of a virtualized environment with switches and routers that you would have to pay for. But it's really the licensing that trips you up. I guess the licensing and the installation process. GNS3 is just a bear to install. But eventually you get it. It's a real challenge. Other questions on here. There were some questions going back and forth about speeds and cable categories. And I think it's worth mentioning what this means. So I'm gonna kind of flip over to some of these questions that are going back and forth about cable categories, because I'm sort of stepping into the middle of a conversation just so you can get a perspective of what we're talking about. So there's a conversation going about 10 gig Ethernet in the chat. And the question talked about throughput. Here's the one I saw. So this was talking about running category 6A cable, in this case, a shielded twisted pair version of category 6A, which is what you'll find. And it mentions that Cat 6A has a higher throughput. I think it would be more accurate to say category 6A can support a higher throughput. And this is the part where I think it's important to put these in the right context. The context I have for cable, and I was looking around for an Ethernet cable, but I don't have one. But if I held up an Ethernet cable right now, and I asked you, what's the speed of this cable? Some people would say, oh, is that a Cat 6 cable? Here's the speed of the cable. But that's not the way it works. The speed of a cable is there is no speed. It's a cable. It's a piece of copper. It's a bunch of pieces of copper. They don't have a speed. It's just copper. It just sits there. It's not going anywhere. There's no speed. There's nothing happening there. The cable itself is not what determines the speed. And I think that's the way a lot of people approach this. Oh, if it's category 5, the cable goes this fast. If it's category 6, the cable goes this fast. The cable doesn't go anywhere. The cable just sits there. The way to categorize this, the way to think about it, is that you have a certain Ethernet standard you're planning to use. You might be running 1,000 base T. That's gigabit speeds over twisted pair cable. You may be running 10 gig Ethernet. That would be 10G base T. Now we're getting back into our network plus, aren't we? So those are two Ethernet standards. If you go to the Ethernet standard, and you can download the standard for free from the IEEE, and I highly recommend, if you want to download the IEEE 802.3 standard, there is a section of the IEEE website where you can do that and it doesn't cost you anything. Because if you are manufacturing equipment, you have to buy the standard. But if you are a student, like we are, you can download the standard for free. And when you download the standard, you find the type you would like to use. Oh, I'd like to use 10 gig Ethernet over twisted pair. That's the 10G base T standard. And if you read through the 10G base T standard, what you will find is that it will specify the minimum cable required to be able to send 10G base T signals from one device to another over a certain distance. So it's really the standard that determines the minimum cable type that you have to use. And then if you use that cable type, the category of cable is really describing a manufacturing process and a verification process that the manufacturing has worked properly, because they test those cables just to make sure they're made to the proper specifications. So category 5 has a certain set of specifications the cable must meet. Category 5E has a certain minimum set of specifications, physical specifications the cable must meet. Same thing for category 6 and category 6A. But you have to go back to the standard to know if the standard will support sending that particular signal over that particular cable type across a particular distance. And so that's the way it's written up in my Network Plus exam. So when you're looking at what cable should I use for a particular function, your first question should not be, what category cable is it? It should instead be, what signal are you putting over this network? That will determine what type of cable we should be using. And then, of course, at that point, you have to memorize all your cable categories and know the differences between those so that you're really using the right cable type. So I would highly recommend anybody trying to figure that part out and work through cable categories, that you not associate a speed with a category of cable, that you instead associate an Ethernet standard with a category of cable, because that will, there's many Ethernet standards, by the way, that support different categories of cable depending on how far you need to go. Category 10G base T is a really good example of that. So 10 gig networking requires you to use a certain type of cable if you need to go a certain distance, but use a different category cable if you need to go longer. So there's a really good example of how it's not about the cable, it's about the standard. You let the standard tell you what cable you should be using. I think that's pretty important too. Other questions, and we're going to kind of finish this up, I think, with this next question, and being able to work through those. And by the way, for those of you that do download the standard and you start reading through the 802.3 standard, you won't understand about 90% of it. It's ridiculous. It's written for engineers, and I am not one of those. So you sort of get the handle of it and what they're trying to tell you as you step through this. It's really for computer science people, not for IT people. But there's a section of it on each standard that talks about the minimum cable you should use, and that is the most important part for us and working through this, especially as it applies to Network Plus. Other questions, other ideas, other thoughts, other suggestions. Let's keep going through here and what's available. In fact, I'm building out a new network segment. In fact, I was trying to choose between Category 6 and Category 6A. And I was thinking of going Category 6, but I wanted to extend a different distance. But we also have to think about labor costs. Somebody's coming in and they have to punch down, crimp, or install a cable. There's a certain cost associated with that. It's a little bit more expensive as you get through the higher end cables because it's a little more complex in the process of punching down or crimping these connectors. But what I realized pretty quick was that you got to plan for the future. You have to really think about, well, let's go with Category 6A, even though it's slightly more expensive. The guy's already here doing the cabling. They're already here doing the punch down blocks. They're already here putting on the crimped connectors. Okay, well, we'll stick with the 6A and make this happen. That way we're covered for the future. And that's, in fact, they kind of talked me out of fiber and back to copper. I go back and forth all the time though, fiber and copper, because there's such great benefits on the fiber side, but it's so difficult to manage relative to copper. A little more complex to manage the infrastructure than copper is. Copper's so great at having that there. Other questions, and it might be this kind of fits. Dark's for the follow up on this. Dark says, well, in 50 years from now, is it just going to be all fiber to the workstations? We got fiber to the homes. Are we just going to do fiber to every workstation? I don't know. I don't know if we are or not. The speeds are certainly increasing. We're continuing to do 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig over different media, including coax and in some cases twisted pair. But fiber certainly has fiber is the ultimate future proof because you can do so much with fiber and it lasts so much longer, supports the future so much better than copper does, that would not be unreasonable to think that we might put fiber everywhere instead of putting copper everywhere. Or, let me throw this one at you, why are we even using physical media at all? What if we get wireless networking going so fast and so reliable that we just no longer plug anything into the wall anymore? That's not unreasonable either. That could certainly happen. We don't know. That's the beauty of networking, is that you never stop. This is constantly evolving. I realize that part of if you go look in a data center, that part of us in networking look at old equipment running older switches with slower speeds, and we think, is this industry going anywhere? But then you look at the emerging technologies, the higher bandwidths, the different media, the conversions into 5G and 802.11 wireless. There's always something new and something exciting going on. And I think that's what drives me more on the networking side than anything, is just there's always new toys. There's always new technologies, new things to learn, new problems to solve, new implementations, and using new media. And so whether you're using copper or fiber or wireless, we'll have to figure out where things go from here. But we just know it's going to go up. We know that it's going to go faster, and we know there's going to be new things to learn. So this is a great place to be. If you're someone who is excited about technology, somebody who is always willing to learn the next thing, willing to put in the time to get into that niche and be smarter than anyone else in that area, then you're in the right place. And when you do those things, you follow that path, what you'll find is the opportunities suddenly start appearing. There's something to be said that there's not really just luck. There's a lot of preparation for people that suddenly become lucky. You have to be ready when that particular opportunity comes along. And if you plan, you learn, you spend the time and put in the effort to really get these technologies down, then what you'll find is suddenly you're a lot more lucky than you used to be. Well, it's not really luck. You were ready when those opportunities came along. And that's what I recommend you do. Just get ready for the opportunities. They will come along. You just have to be ready when they get there. And unless you're spending the time on this, you never know when that's going to happen. Well, that kind of covers us for this month's March 2023 N10-008 Network Plus Study Group. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time in the first hour answering my questions, and thank you for your questions in the second hour. I always say we could not do this without you. It is so true. Chat room, you're awesome. Thank you so much for your questions and your time. And there's all kinds of little side conversations that go on this whole time I'm talking, which is fantastic. If you are watching this on YouTube or you're watching this on my channel, flip over to the YouTube side so that you can watch the conversation take place in the chat room as well. It's really worthwhile. There's some very smart people in there talking about all kinds of different things. Really recommend you do that. Thanks for being here. Stop back by on Thursday. We got a Security Plus study group, all new questions. We'll do a similar thing where I have questions in the first hour to you. You can ask questions of me in the second hour. Thanks for being here. We will see you next time on the N10-008 Network Plus study group. Thanks, everybody.